Chapter 1885. Exalted Lu Hua hesitated for a while and said slowly, "You can put it that way." Hearing his vague words, Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Could it be that you're not sure? Or is there something else?" Exalted Lu Hua said, "At that time, my main body and my fellow Taoists only wanted to find a fairy and didn't think about anything else. They also didn't consider whether this would cause any changes. But later, we gradually realized that the result might be different from what we expected." Zhang Yan became more interested and asked, "Oh? What's the difference?" Exalted Lu Hua said, "When this matter was about to be completed, my main body and my fellow Taoists suddenly realized that another world had been formed outside of the heaven that had been formed. It appeared abruptly without any prior signs." Hearing this, Zhang Yan's eyes flickered. Exalted Lu Hua continued, "Because of this, a dispute arose between us." He sighed slightly. "Two of my fellow Taoists believed that this place just now had fulfilled their previous visualization. It should be the fairy that would lead us to the chaotic realm. As for the original heaven, it was just a prelude and was useless. We should give it up and focus on this place instead. However, my main body believes that the reason why I was able to appear in this place was because of my previous visualization. If I were to suddenly change my path, it would be the opposite of what I expected and it wouldn't work." Both sides insisted on their own opinions and couldn't convince anyone. In the end, to avoid harming our relationship, we decided to split up. Zhang Yan asked, "What happened next?" Exalted Lu Hua shook his head and said, "I don't know what happened in the end. Only this heaven still exists. As for whether it was the first heaven that had been formed or the one that had been formed later, I can't judge it." Zhang Yan pondered for a while and felt a little strange. Logically speaking, since both heavens were possible, they should just verify it one by one. Anyway, as long as there weren't any external tribulations, a true young bigwig would have an endless lifespan. Why would they go to such extremes? Was it an either-or? There must be a reason that couldn't be explained clearly. He privately speculated that there might be two reasons. The first was that each person could only choose one of the two realms, so there was nothing they could do about it. It was because it involved the Tao path, so conflict was inevitable. Another possibility was that these people had come into contact with certain things while they were visualizing, and their own knowledge had been diverted by some unknown force, just like how Bai Wei and the other four had been secretly guided by Taoist One Quebec. Their minds had been clouded, and so they had fallen into some sort of obsession. Of course, the actual situation might be even more complicated. Without actual contact, it would be impossible to verify. After thinking for a while, he said, "I wonder which world does Exalted Lu Hua think this is?" Exalted Lu Hua thought for a while and said, "I'm inclined to believe that this is the place where I first visualized. However, I can't be completely sure." Zhang Yan understood. This was why he was hesitating just now. However, this was something worth pondering. Of the two worlds, only one was left. Did Exalted Lu Hua's main body and his fellow Taoists succeed or fail in the end? He tried to ask, and Exalted Lu Hua said, "I don't know about this. It's just that most of the big shots who had participated in this matter, including my main body, had disappeared. I don't know if they had gone to the upper realm, or if something else had happened." Zhang Yan started pondering. As the saying goes, a person goes on a boat. If they reach the other side, they won't come back. If he thought about it in a positive way, then Exalted Lu Hua's main body and his fellow Taoists had gone to the upper realm. If he thought about it in a negative way, then this group of people hadn't succeeded in the end, and the void realm had disappeared along with them. He personally thought that it would be hard for Exalted Lu Hua and his fellow Taoists to achieve this. In the end, it was still because their cultivation wasn't strong enough. However, what they were doing might not be impossible. If they could get help from the outside, or the guidance of someone in the upper realm, then this wouldn't be an obstacle. However, he keenly sensed that Exalted Lu Hua's words had revealed a piece of information inadvertently. He said, "Taoist friend, just now, you said that most of them had disappeared. In that case, someone had stayed behind?" Exalted Lu Hua replied, there was indeed one person. His name was Feng Chan. When facing the dispute between the two sides, he didn't make any choice. Instead, he directly retreated and said that he wouldn't get involved in this matter anymore. As for whether he had participated in it or not, I have no way to know. Zhang Yan nodded slightly. Since he had a name, he couldn't investigate the experience of this person. Since it was exalted Lu Hua who had done this with the others, he should know some inside information. If there were still cave mansions left behind, then he could find some clues. He pondered for a while and said, "How many people have heard about the matter of the broken world?" Exalted Lu Hua said, "Logically, besides my main body and my fellow Taoists, no one should know about it. However, the one who had formed karma with my main body knew about it. Maybe someone had leaked it to him, or maybe he had found some records of the past." Zhang Yan said, "I have one last question. Where is the unknown place in the broken world?" He could sense that Taoist Wan Kei's karma had landed here, but he didn't know where the entrance to this world was. Actually, Taoist Wan Kei also didn't know about it. If he could find the entrance, he wouldn't need to discuss it with Exalted Lu Hua and could enter it by himself. Exalted Lu Hua said, "I have to pay the price of my incarnation to open this world. However, I can only do this for an instant. If you agree to help me settle this karma, I will immediately open the door to this world. In the future, you can decide how to deal with this world." Zhang Yan nodded. It seemed that this broken world was connected by karma. Without the permission of its original owner, it was hard to enter. Although he could barge in by force, he would also destroy this place. He said, "Taoist, you can settle your karma by yourself. I won't do it for you, but I won't let you get hurt for no reason. If I want to enter this world, I will help you to maintain this body." Exalted Lu Hua was stunned and silently bowed. Zhang Yan returned the bow and said, "Thank you for clearing up my doubts, Taoist. Sorry for disturbing you today. If there's anything I don't understand, I will come to visit again." He felt that now wasn't the best time to enter this world. Taoist Wan Kei knew a lot of things. Most of them might have been obtained from his original body when he was alive, and he suspected that some of them were related to the Busushan Weili. He hadn't returned this Weili yet. After this matter was settled, if there were still many things he didn't understand, he could go in and take a look. With a thought, he left this place in the blink of an eye and returned to the Qinghuan Palace. He sat down and spread out his magic power. He slowly sent the Weili into Busushan, and the part that was missing was quickly filled up. During this process, he vaguely understood something. Unknowingly, his cultivation had improved. This wasn't just because of this, but also because of the battle with Taoist Wan Quebec. Since there were no more obstacles, he tried to look deeper into Busushan. After immersing himself in it for an unknown period of time, his spirit just now withdrew from the outside world. However, only a moment had passed. This time, he had really benefited a lot. He understood that he wasn't far from the true upper realm, but he still lacked a very crucial step. He vaguely guessed how he should go, and also understood that this step wasn't too difficult for him. However, no matter from Taoist Wan Kei's attitude or his own point of view, this matter definitely couldn't be done easily. He had to be extra cautious and find ways to verify it. In particular, he could use the various actions of the past sages as a reference. For example, the broken world was worth exploring. Apart from that, he also gained something else this time. Taoist Wan Kei had the ability to interfere with the cognition and memory of others. Deng Zhang and the other heartless Taoists had been used by him before, which led to the subsequent incidents. With the return of Busushan's Weili, he was able to peer deeper, and naturally understood how to use this method. In fact, as long as one's magic power reached his level, one could do this to those who were weaker than oneself. However, this wasn't something that could be done as one wished. This place definitely couldn't touch the root of the person's cognition and couldn't go against their nature. If he were to use this method on Bai Wei and the others right now, he could use a non-existent matter to cause them to misjudge. However, if this matter went against their own will or harmed their own interests, then they would definitely be suspicious and would not easily fall into the trap. For example, if he wanted Taoist 1K to tell him everything he knew, even if he was only a wisp of essence chi, it was unlikely that he could do it. It was more likely that he would die under the pressure of the chi dynamic. Zhang Yan understood that because true yang cultivators could make everything beneficial to themselves, this should be because his magic power and cultivation had increased, causing this power to increase further. Thus, he could slightly interfere with those of the same generation. From the looks of it, it was obvious that Taoist 1K had used such a method to lure Bai Wei and the others to the 1K galaxy. In that case, he could use the same method to make this person behave. However, after some consideration, he didn't do so. He had kept this person alive to stir up the karma and draw the Xian stone into the world. If he interfered and caused the karma to not flourish, then it would go against the original intention. Moreover, these people couldn't threaten humanity at all. He put this matter aside and thought about how to investigate the broken world. The only clue now was Taoist Feng Chan. If he could find this person's whereabouts or his cave abode of the past, then perhaps there would be a way to understand the truth. Thus, he settled his spirit and began to try to look at the past. With his current infinite magic power, he could try to look at everything in Bushutian's past. If he could really do it, then no secret in the past could be hidden from him. However, it wasn't that he hadn't done this before, but every time he looked at the cycle of the calendar, he could no longer move forward. This path clearly couldn't be taken, so he could only try to find clues from this calendar. Just a moment later, a boundary appeared in his field of vision. He had a feeling that this was very likely the target he was looking for. Chapter 1886. After Zhang Yan saw this place, he found that it was still in Butian, which was not surprising. After all, this place was ruled by humanity in the last era, and it was also the place where Zhou Huanyu and Jade came into the world. Whether it was for cultivation or observation, it was undoubtedly more convenient for a true yang cultivator to choose to stay here. But when he was about to go there, his heart moved, and he turned to look. In the void primordial sea, he saw another cave abode of this person. Looking at the time, it seemed to be later than the previous one. And looking at it, it seemed that before the cycle of time, it was already there, and this place was very hidden. If he did not have his current cultivation, it was very likely that he would have overlooked it. He thought for a while, and decided to go according to the order, to go to Butian first. With a change of heart, the scenery in front of him suddenly changed, and he was already standing in a picturesque wonderland. Under his feet was a big cliff, and below it was a cloud stream, and there was a warm spring flowing through it. The change of time in the outside world did not seem to affect this place. The plum blossoms in the valley were in full bloom, pink and red ink, and dyed the green. The wind danced on the treetops, and the petals fluttered, fell into the pool, and flowed into the stream, and the fragrance was strong. He looked to the side, and there was a layer of chi screen on the opposite side of the cliff, and there was obviously a mystery in it. He turned and walked directly there. After a few steps, he saw fist-sized pure white clouds rushing up from the side. They were as light as brocade, and as light as cotton. They wandered outside, and from time to time, they would come to his side. They looked full of spirituality, and lively. One of them looked like it was not dangerous, and it came up by itself, and changed into the appearance of a jade fox, and followed his footsteps there. Zhang Yan looked at it and nodded. As expected, it was once a true yang cave abode, and the restrictive power of all things was still there. It seemed that these little things had been playing with their master, or else they would have immediately melted when they got close to him. Not long after, he arrived in front of the chi screen. As he walked up, he couldn't help but move to the side, making a path for himself. About 100 steps later, he arrived in front of a large hut that was supported by brocade clouds. There were a few red-crowned cranes that were leisurely flying back and forth. These seemed to be just images, but for true yang, illusion and reality were not that important. If you wanted it to be real, then it would be real. If you thought it was an illusion, then it was just an illusion. There was also a flower garden in front of the hut, and there were some strange flowers and plants growing there. It looked like they were all moved here from the Kunsher continent. Although the owner was no longer here, he still maintained the appearance when he left, as if he would return at any time. Zhang Yan glanced around and ignored everything around him. He walked up the stone steps and entered the hut. When he reached inside, a spirit light flashed like lightning, and it turned into a child that bowed respectfully to him. "Greetings, guest from afar." Zhang Yan sized it up. It was rare to see a Lu Ling placed here. It was the Lu Ling itself that was rare. Ever since the great change in Busu Tian, other than those almighty existences, it was the first time he had seen a remnant of the consciousness of the previous era. In reality, he didn't need to ask anything at this moment. He only needed to search the memories of this child, and it wouldn't be difficult to find out everything he knew. However, he didn't do so. This time, it was a guest who came, so there was no need to do such a rude thing. He said, "Child, are you guarding this place?" The boy bowed and said, "Yes, my name is Dan Mo. This is the cave abode of my master, Yuan Venerate Fengchan. Ever since master left, the Supreme Venerate is the first guest to visit." He bowed sideways. "Supreme Venerate, please come in and take a seat." Zhang Yan nodded in agreement and followed him into a tea room. Just now, when he sat down on the praying mat, he heard the sound of the stream outside. The beautiful music flowed along with the water, and fragrant tea floated up from the stone platform. Dan Mo bowed and said, "This is the spirit tea that Master transplanted from the Kunsher continent. In the past, every time an esteemed guest came, he would use this to receive them. Please have a taste." Zhang Yan took a sip and felt as if he was drinking a cool dew. It was abnormally clear, and also like the gathering of rain after a long drought. His senses became much clearer. As expected of a natural spirit seed from the Kunsher continent. He put down the teacup and said, "I came here for a matter." Dan Mo said respectfully, "Master isn't here. If Lord has any questions, I can answer them." Zhang Yan said, "I heard that Taoist Feng Chan, exalted Lu Hua, and a few other Taoists were searching for the location of Chaos Heaven. Today, I want to clarify a matter. Not long ago, I heard exalted Lu Hua say that because of a dispute back then, Taoist Feng Chan left halfway and disappeared. Thus, I came here to investigate." Dan Mo heaved a sigh of relief and said, "So Lord has come for this matter." Before Master left, he specially took care of this matter. "Lord, please wait for a moment. I'll be back soon." He apologized and turned to leave. Zhang Yan didn't look at where he went. He just sat on the spot and waited. After a while, Dan Mo appeared in front of him again. He held a jade slip in his hands and said, "Master once said that if a few Taoists came to find him for the matter of crossing the realm, then he should say that he went out to help his friends refine treasures and temporarily didn't have the time to participate in this matter. However, if there are unfamiliar Taoists coming to find him in the future, then he should offer this jade slip to them. There will naturally be an explanation inside." Zhang Yan took a look, and the jade slip flew into his hands. He sent his thoughts into it and found that it talked about the matter back then. There was also a cave dwelling in the void Essence Sea, and if he wanted to know more about it, he could go there. From the emotions revealed between the lines, it wasn't difficult for him to understand this Taoist Feng Chan's character. "If people respect me, I'll respect them tenfold. If people offend me, I'll definitely offend them." Now that he was here, if he followed the etiquette of a guest, then the little boy would naturally take out this item. If he acted recklessly with his cultivation, then he wouldn't know the location of the cave dwelling in the end. Of course, he had already investigated the cave dwelling, but it wasn't difficult to see that this jade slip itself was a keepsake. If he barged in forcefully, it might cause the cave dwelling to collapse, and then he wouldn't be able to achieve his goal. He put the item away and said to Dan Mo, "Today, I owe a favor to Taoist Feng Chan. Since he's no longer here, then I'll return it to you." As he spoke, he tapped the center of Dan Mo's brows with a finger. Dan Mo's body trembled, and he took 2 steps back. He then opened his hands and looked at himself, only to discover to his surprise that he had actually turned into a body of flesh and blood. At this moment, he couldn't help but be overjoyed. Speaking of which, as the Lu Ling that guarded this place, it was possible for him to live for billions of years. Suddenly turning into a body of flesh and blood seemed like a loss, but in reality, it was a great advantage. Because he was trapped here, there would be a day when he would die. But now that he had a body, he could cultivate. There were countless secret cultivation techniques in his mind, and there were also countless treasures planted in the cave dwelling. As long as he could get through the initial difficult cultivation, then he might be able to climb to a higher realm in the future. He was very grateful to Zhang Yan and sincerely thanked him. "Thank you, Exalted One, for fulfilling my wish." Zhang Yan's thoughts changed, and he directly left this place. According to the instructions of the Jade Slip, he directly came to a world that was located in the Void Essence Sea. When he arrived here, the Jade Slip in his sleeve trembled lightly, and he let it go. A ray of spiritual light flew out and landed in the air. There was the sound of a bell, and a stone door rumbled open in front of him. Without hesitation, Zhang Yan waved his sleeve and moved inside. Compared to Bushutian's cave dwelling, this place was much simpler. There were no decorations, and there was only a spell table in the huge cave room. He walked up the stairs and reached the top. There was a bronze table that was half a person's height, and a scroll of jade was placed on a wooden shelf. After looking at it for a moment, he took it into his hand and slowly opened it. His eyes flickered slightly. What was written on it was about the broken world, and it revealed a piece of information that Taoist Lu Hua didn't know. Just when another world was born, there was a deep consciousness that flashed in the world that they were visualizing. Although it was only for a moment, it actually made them feel a sense of fear for no reason. Taoist Lu Hua and the others thought that this was a sign that led to Chaos Heaven, so it was the right way to go there. On the other hand, the other side held the opposite opinion and thought that they should avoid this place. This was the source of the dispute between the two sides. Perhaps Taoist Feng Chan had read some records of the past. He believed that there was an unknown existence on the way to Muddy Heaven. The reason why no one could go there in the past was because they were obstructed by it. Now, this thought was clearly directed at them. Because of the fear in his heart, he didn't want to continue and retreated with the excuse that he didn't want to argue. However, it was clear that this person didn't truly cut off contact with the group. There were many records of his interactions with Taoist Lu Hua later on. But when it came to these matters, the entire article was filled with many vague and unclear words. Zhang Yan speculated that the latter words might have been deliberately written by Taoist Feng Chan in such a manner. From Taoist Feng Chan's point of view, if that existence didn't directly interfere with them, then it might use another method, such as tampering with all the knowledge of the world and even the future. This was similar to how he could change the memories of some of his peers. Therefore, if the recorded words were vague and did not directly point to the true answer, it could instead be preserved. However, he thought that if there really was such an existence, then it clearly had its limits. Otherwise, it could just directly change Taoist Feng Chan or himself. That way, there wouldn't be these things left in the cave abode and he wouldn't come to investigate today. Of course, what others said was what others said after all, and he wouldn't completely believe it. This Taoist Feng Chan wasn't necessarily superior to him in terms of cultivation and magic power. It was just that he might have come into contact with something that he hadn't come into contact with. Based on his knowledge, the opinions he obtained might not necessarily be correct. Perhaps there was the possibility of it being distorted and magnified. However, he could also see that although Taoist Feng Chan had retreated out of fear, he might have been somewhat unwilling to leave these words for others to read. After reading these contents, he thought for a while and was about to put the item away when his heart suddenly moved. He flipped the jade scroll and saw that a line of words slowly appeared behind it. Chapter 1887. Zhang Yan looked at it and saw that it was the first line. There were only a few words written on it. There was no news for 100 years. One day, a friend sent a letter saying that he wanted to cross. His heart jolted slightly. The main content of the letter was about how to cross the realm through visualization, the source of the dispute between the two parties, and Taoist Feng Chan's own guesses. It was a pity that there was no mention of what happened after that. This line of words only appeared for a moment before disappearing quickly. Immediately after, the second line of words appeared. I was worried and sent a letter to persuade you to slow down. Friend replied, it is a great fortune to see the way through. Come quickly. When Zhang Yan saw this line of words, he didn't know why, but for some reason, he felt that something was wrong. He wanted to continue reading, but after waiting for a long time, no more words appeared. Clearly, the record stopped here. He thought for a while. It was very likely that Taoist Feng Chan had received the letter and decided to go there after weighing the pros and cons. What happened after that was that these people had all disappeared without a trace. Therefore, from the looks of it, this Feng Chan might not have been able to extricate himself from this matter and had finally fallen into it. At this moment, a thought suddenly appeared in his mind. Could this unknown existence be that Taoist Wan Ke? This thought was immediately rejected. Although Taoist Wan Ke was strong enough, and his past actions were the most suspicious, and he even had the ability to change the memories and cognition of his peers, it was actually the most impossible. Because if he had come out from those two spaces, there would be no need for him to ask exalted Lu Hua about the location of the broken world. If there were no accidents, this person should be Yuan Zun of the human Tao who had peeped into the truth in the past. It was just that he had interacted with exalted Lu Hua and the others in the past. He looked at the jade scroll in his hand several times. Because Taoist Feng Chan and the others had disappeared before the cycle of the era, and this item was also written in the previous era, he couldn't see the past directly. After confirming that there were no hidden traces on it, he put it away. It was just that after looking at these words and combining them with what Taoist Wan Ke had said previously, he could see that although their paths were different, if one wanted to reach the upper realm, the danger might not come from oneself, but from the outside world. It was not difficult to take this step. The difficult part was not to go back. He couldn't help but think of Taoist Wan Quebec based on his words. That person should have reached this step back then, but he didn't know what exactly happened after that. Perhaps he lost his life because of that. Therefore, he needed to think carefully about how he should act. However, no matter what, he had to go and explore the broken world. With his current strength, unless someone of the upper realm made a move, no one would be able to do anything to him. His gaze swept the area once, and when he saw that there was nothing else in the abode, he returned to Qinghuan Palace with a thought. He then sat down and observed the river of Tianji, trying to deduce the cause and effect of the mysteries within. A month later, Jingyu entered the hall and reported, Master, Sage Wei has arrived. Zhang Yan nodded and said, call him in. Wei Zihong walked into the hall and bowed, disciple greets master. He took out a genealogical document from his sleeve and said, this is the general plan of Wang's handling of matters. There is also a contract written by the natives of Wanke, most of whom are willing to submit to the 9 continents. Please take a look, master. Zhang Yan took it and glanced through it. This time, Wei Zihong had mediated the interests of all parties very well. This time, the ones who contributed the most were Taoist Yuhuan and the others. After all, they had the advantage in numbers, but the cultivators of the 9 continents also gained experience. He put it aside and said, you did well this time. After handing over the matters, you can go to the Kunshi continent and choose a place to cultivate. As he said that, he flicked his finger, and a clear light flew down and turned into a jade scroll that floated in front of him. This contains the secret cultivation method of the sect. Go back and study it well. Wei Zihong received it with a serious expression and bowed, saying, disciple thanks master. Zhang Yan nodded slightly and said with a smile, during your cultivation, if you have any questions, you can ask me now. Wei Zihong was overjoyed. He knew that this was a rare opportunity, so he hurriedly talked about many questions and his own understanding of cultivation, and asked his master to correct him. Zhang Yan also answered them one by one. During the conversation between master and disciple, Wei Zihong suddenly thought of something and said, "This time, the cultivators of the 9 continents have seen many Enlightenment Realm cultivators, and many fellow Taoists have asked if the Enlightenment Realm is a suitable path." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "If a cultivator only wants to live as long as heaven and earth, not be contaminated by external influences, and have no heart for the great Tao, they can also walk this path. In the past, I met a cultivator who cultivated for millions of years, but never entered this path. That person's mana was refined, and compared to this generation, it doesn't seem to be much inferior. Speaking of which, although Enlightenment Realm was not the right path, it was still an option under the situation of not being able to reach true yang. However, among the sects of the 9 continents, there were only a few who had cultivated to the 3rd level of mortal transformation realm, so it was still too early to talk about Enlightenment Realm. But now, a few bloodline descendants of gods and monsters could fill in the gap of this level of combat power." Wei Zihong nodded. He also had his own views. He thought that if a cultivator chose this path, they would have no other choice. If they only wanted to Enlightenment Realm, they would have already lost the desire to pursue Tao. Not to mention entering this realm, they might not even be able to cut off their past and future bodies. After the master and disciple talked for a few days, Wei Zihong took his leave. Zhang Yan took out a spell, and after a moment, there was a flash of light in the hall, and Taoist Wan Ke appeared. He said, "I have already met Taoist Lu Hua, and now I want to go to the broken world." Taoist Wan Ke only sneered. Zhang Yan said, "Even if you don't say it, I will still go. Previously, you tried to stop me because you think that I can reach the upper realm. Now that I am going, regardless of whether I can find the secret or not, I will insist on this trip." Taoist Wan Ke said coldly, "I have already said it. Since you don't want to listen to my advice, there is no need for you to say more to me." Zhang Yan smiled. It was good to be able to speak. He said, "Since you want to stop me, you should tell me the reason. If I think that it is reasonable, I might slow down." Taoist Wan Ke questioned, "What's the use of slowing down? Will you stop just like that?" Zhang Yan smiled, "If you don't try, how will you know?" Taoist Wan Ke harumphed and stopped talking again. At this moment, Zhang Yan said, "I wonder if exalted Lu Hua and the others have succeeded." Taoist Wan Ke seemed to be disdainful and said, "I don't know how they were back then, but it is impossible for them to succeed on their own." Zhang Yan nodded secretly. This was the same as his judgment. Unless there was external help, there was almost no hope for Lu Hua and the others to succeed on their own. Moreover, from his words, Taoist Wan Ke indeed had nothing to do with this matter. Of course, it was purely based on cultivation. It seemed like these tricks weren't within his consideration. He thought for a while and said, "As far as I know, they have all disappeared." "Do you know where they went?" Taoist Wan Ke said, "I don't know either. They must have gone to the 2 worlds. However, that place is definitely not the place that leads to Hun Tian. Since you want to go to the broken world, you should go and check it out yourself. You don't have to ask me anymore. If you didn't force me to go nowhere, I wouldn't have thought of leaving it here." Zhang Yan smiled. This person should be speaking the truth. Although this person said that he was very vigilant, he actually made the same judgment as Zhang Yan. He thought that the broken world was dangerous and he could suppress it with his Weili power, so there was no need for him to be afraid of it. Now, in terms of cultivation, he was already above him. Whatever he could do it too. In fact, he could even surpass him. Speaking of which, he could try the visualization method used by Taoist Lu Hua and the others. After all, he had a good foundation. If he used this method, he might have a higher chance of entering Hun Tian. However, this method would take too long. Secondly, this method was not the right path. Therefore, there was no need for him to neglect the essentials. This time, he did not want to understand everything in one go. Therefore, he waved his sleeves and sent Taoist Wan Ke back to the place of imprisonment. Then, he found Jingyu and said a few words to him. Then, he came to Taoist Lu Hua's cave dwelling. Exalted Lu Hua's figure was dimmer than before. When he saw Zhang Yan, he stood up from his seat and bowed to him. Zhang Yan stretched out his hand and pointed. In an instant, a fire lamp appeared on the table in front of him. He said, "With the help of this lamp, you can ensure that your essence won't dissipate when you use your technique. In the future, as long as the lamp is not extinguished, you won't need to worry." When Exalted Lu Hua heard this, he hurriedly bowed and thanked him. "Thank you, Exalted." Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "No need to thank me. Today, I received your favor, so I will naturally repay you. As for the karma of the mortal world, you will have to resolve it yourself in the future." Exalted Lu Hua nodded and said, "I will open this realm gate for you." He bowed to Zhang Yan again and took out a seal. Then, his figure turned illusory and a realm gate appeared in the cave. At this moment, his body became slightly illusory. However, as the fire shone on him, he became more solid. Zhang Yan couldn't help but feel relieved. Zhang Yan stood in front of the realm gate and didn't enter immediately. Instead, he observed for a while and sensed that it was empty. Nothing existed. Even the consciousness that Taoist Feng Chan had mentioned could not be sensed. After a while, he shook his sleeves and walked in. He looked around. There was a cloud path under his feet that slowly moved forward until it disappeared into the void. After staring for a while, he didn't see the path of the past. He pondered for a while and walked along the path. This time, he entered this realm with his incarnation. His main body was still within the essence Qi Si. In fact, most true Yang bigwigs would also go out like this. If Lu Hua, Feng Chan, and the others had entered this realm in the past, they would have used their incarnations as long as they were cautious. In that case, even if they encountered any danger, their main bodies wouldn't be affected. Unless they had come here with their main bodies, then it would be hard to say. He couldn't help but think of the words that Taoist Feng Chan had left behind. He deduced that there was a possibility that someone had found a path that led to muddy heaven. Or, that was the place that they had been looking for. Therefore, their main bodies had also come here. As for whether these people had reached the other side, it was still hard to know. If he continued to go down, he might be able to find some clues. Chapter 1888. Zhang Yan continued walking. This path seemed endless, but in reality, if he could sense the end of it, he wouldn't have to walk slowly. He could reach that place with just a thought. At this moment, he was walking while observing. This void realm was indeed different from an ordinary world. This was because it wasn't a place for one to stop. Instead, it existed for the purpose of crossing to the upper worlds. Therefore, there wasn't anything here. There was only the simplest clear and turbid qi and the path of clouds beneath his feet. This was how the universe was divided. Now, he still couldn't confirm whether this was the first crossing realm that Exalted Lu Hua and the others had created. However, judging from the situation before him, its foundation wasn't inferior to the 1K starstream that Taoist 1K had created. Therefore, if that person had moved the Weili over, this world would have been able to withstand it and continue to fight against him. Perhaps it would have even triggered some unknown means. Although there weren't many clues for him to discern, he had a rough idea after repeatedly deducing. If he just walked like this, there wouldn't be any changes even if the world ended. He would need to use his will to see the door. As the saying went, everything will be formed where one's will shown. Back then, Exalted Lu Hua and the others had created this place with the goal of entering the muddy heavens. Their goal was clear, and their desire to obtain it was unusually strong. Therefore, there were signs appearing in the end. Therefore, if he wanted to stir up this pool of stagnant water, he would need to have a strong will. If he didn't have a will, nothing would be born. However, he was different from these people. He deeply doubted that this place could connect to the muddy heavens. In fact, he didn't think that this person had succeeded in the end. Therefore, even if the door they visualized existed, it wouldn't appear because of his will. However, he was here to investigate the possible changes that might have occurred in the past. Therefore, he didn't really need to go to the opposite side of the door. In fact, he didn't even need to find the door that was still in doubt. As long as he could see some traces left behind by this person, it would be enough. With his current magic power, he could forcefully pry into it and extract everything from the source. Doing this could also prove one thing. If he was unable to do this, then it would mean that he had been tainted by the karma of an upper realm mighty figure, or that he had truly connected to the heavens. This could prove that he had indeed gone to where he was supposed to go. As he pondered, his eyes lit up and the magic power in his body surged out. At this moment, he could not recklessly unleash his powers. Instead, he had to control them properly. Otherwise, the entire world would collapse and he would not be able to see anything. Not long after, ripples began to appear in the surrounding world, and the traces that were originally hidden deep within the world also appeared in front of him one by one. Although he was unable to reflect the events of the past to the present due to the rotation of the calendar, he could distinguish the roots from the chi of heaven and earth and deduce where it came from. After investigating for a while, he discovered that the source of this world came from several different auras. It should have been created by several true yang experts. So if there were no surprises, this should be the place where Feng Chan, Lu Hua, and the others first visualized. This was also very consistent with his previous speculation. After all, even a wisp of exalted Lu Hua's essence chi clone could easily open this door. This was sufficient to prove that there was a rather deep connection of karma between the two sides. Just as he was doing this, he discovered something. Outside of this world, another world was gradually opening up. He looked over and found that this world was extremely similar to the one under his feet. Even the cloud path was the same. He couldn't help but have a thought. After investigating carefully, he discovered that there was actually no difference between the two void realms. They had completely originated from the same place. They were like two sides of a thin piece of paper. Moreover, there had been at least one separation between them. He immediately understood that this place should be the void realms that had appeared when Lu Hua and the others visualized. As it turned out, it didn't disappear. Instead, it was born from the thoughts of a few people. After that, no one visualized it, so it returned to one. He couldn't help but ponder. The appearance of such a situation was very consistent with his speculation. This was also related to ascending to the upper realm. If he didn't have his current cultivation and magic power, he might not be able to truly understand the changes within. From Taoist Feng Chan's description, Lu Hua and the others had finally found the way out. If it was really the muddy sky gate, because their cultivation wasn't high enough, it might instead bring about a frightening outcome. Perhaps even now, this generation was still on the path to the muddy sky. Perhaps they had indeed seen the location of the door. However, in reality, they would never be able to reach there. They could only continue walking like this. To him, to the current world, these people had completely disappeared. After finding this possible answer, he slightly restrained his magic power. Now, there was still one thing that he didn't understand. It was where the deep consciousness that Feng Chan and the others had felt had come from. Thinking about this, he continued to search. Under his careful search, he finally found a trace of disharmony in the depths of this world. It was as if there was a flaw on top of a pure white jade. Although it did not affect the void space itself, it looked extremely superfluous. Furthermore, he could vaguely see something that even he could not understand. But in the blink of an eye, it disappeared, as if it had never existed. He was unmoved. After repeated deductions, he gradually understood the origin. In reality, the consciousness that Taoist Feng Chan and the others had felt had originally come from their own malice. Because no matter how much they believed that the crossing world could lead to the muddy sky, it was just an assumption. If it could definitely succeed, then there would not have been the subsequent disputes. Thus, there was definitely hesitation. These doubts gradually formed a consciousness of resistance. If that was all, there would not be any problems. No matter how one looked at it, this power originated from Feng Chan, Lu Hua, and the others. How could it not cause them to feel fear? It should be that after this thought was born, it had stirred up something that even he could not see its origin. Perhaps it truly came from muddy sky, or perhaps it came from some other world, causing this consciousness to become slightly different from what it originally was. At this step, the doubts in his heart were gradually resolved. Originally, what he did not understand was that those who could achieve true yang would not be easy to deal with. How could they so easily go to that unpredictable world and not even leave a single person behind? Thus, there was likely an external power here that reversed their understanding, or even blinded their minds. He began to ponder. For now, he did not care about where this power came from. If he tried to climb to the upper realm, he would have to think of a way to guard against it. On the surface, this seemed difficult to guard against, but in reality, there were still ways to deal with it. In just a moment, he had already thought of several ways to deal with it. Having roughly understood the situation here, there was no need to continue staying here. With a thought, he directly returned to the Qinghuan Palace from this place. After sitting down, he waved his sleeve. With a flash of spiritual light, Taoist Wan Ke was once again invited out of the place where he was imprisoned. Once he appeared, he stared at him and said, "Sir, have you been to that place?" Zhang Yan nodded slightly and said, "It seems that this person did not get what he wanted." Taoist Wan Ke sneered and said, "I knew this would happen. How could Hun Tian recklessly pry into it?" He thought that he found the right path, but in the end, he still went astray. Looking at the people since ancient times, other than me and the Emperor, who else could reach the boundless realm? That person is just wishful thinking. If he really has this ability, I will definitely stop him. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Then why did you come here back then?" Taoist Wan Ke did not say the reason, but only said, "Even if you are fated to reach the upper realm, in the end, you will only repeat my mistakes, and it is very likely that all living beings in the heavens will fall into it." Zhang Yan glanced at him and smiled, saying, "I have thought about it. You have warned me many times, and you could have said where the danger is, but you still refuse to say it. First, you want to make me afraid, and I don't dare to take it easily. Second, you should be afraid of something, so you don't dare to say it." Taoist Wan Ke sneered. He knew that his thoughts could not be hidden from Zhang Yan, but so what? In a situation where you know there is danger, especially with him as a precedent, who would rashly take this step under uncertain circumstances? Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Sir, you should know that no matter how you try to intimidate me, I will still take this step in the end. It's just a little delay. To people of my generation, there's not much difference between a moment and a billion years." Taoist Wan Ke snorted and said, "That may not be the case. When the cycle of the era changes, there may be another great change, and you may not be able to avoid it." Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "I am exaggerating. How can the cycle of the era hinder me? Moreover, if there is really an external calamity that is difficult to resist, and the two are equal, then why not go to the upper realm now, and perhaps pick the fruit of Tao? What do you think?" Taoist Wan Ke immediately fell silent. At this moment, Zhang Yan suddenly felt the arrival of Dan Yi's divine will, and guessed that there was something, so he did not ask further and said, "You can think about it, I will look for you next time, maybe you will understand." He waved his sleeve and sent him back. Then, he entered his divine will and said, "What is it that you are looking for me for?" Dan Yi said, "Qi Yao and the other two came looking for me, and they are willing to sign a legislative contract with me. In the future, they will only fight for the primordial jade, and nothing else, so I came to ask, what is your intention?" Zhang Yan could not help but think, if he ascended to the upper realm in the future, then he might go to muddy heaven, so it was not appropriate to keep Bai Wei and the others, but if he wanted to kill or suppress them, there was no one to interfere with the cause and effect. Since Qi Yao and the other two were willing to sign the legislative contract, and they came looking for him, then it was just right. After all, the extraterrestrial demons were the main force outside of humanity. If they were stable, there would not be any great enemies. As for Bai Wei, Deng Zhang, and the others, they were no longer important. Even if he was not here, not to mention that Dan Yi and the other two still had Daoist treasures, even if they did not, it would not be difficult to deal with them. After thinking, he said, "I can agree to this." Chapter 1889. Hearing Zhang Yan's agreement, Dan Yi also said, "My two fellow Taoists and I are also inclined to this, so this matter is decided. However, if Bai Wei and Deng Zhang find out that the extraterrestrial demon has signed a legislative contract with me, they might also come. If so, do you think we should reject or agree?" Zhang Yan replied, "If they come, we can agree, but if they don't, it's fine." Dan Yi said, "If that's the case, the heavens will be temporarily peaceful." Zhang Yan then said, "Recently, I have been thinking about something. I originally wanted to discuss it with the three Taoists, but since you are here today, it's a good time to talk about it." Dan Yi's expression turned serious, and he said, "Please speak, Taoist." Zhang Yan said, "Recently, I's cultivation has been improving, and I can vaguely see the way to advance. In the future, I may enter this gate, but once I pass the pass, I may go to muddy heavens. If I am not here, the matters of humanity will have to be supported by you guys." Dan Yi's expression turned serious, and he said, "Have you thought it through, Taoist?" He knew that it wasn't easy to find a way to pass the upper realm. In the past, there were great figures who tried to do it, but he never heard of anyone succeeding. To be exact, it was hard to even know if it was a success or failure. Zhang Yan nodded slightly. Dan Yi thought about his words, and he tried to persuade him, "Isn't Taoist a little too impatient? With your ability, you can slowly polish your cultivation, and when you are confident, it won't be too late to try to enter this realm." Zhang Yan smiled, and he said, "Don't worry, Taoist. I won't overestimate myself. If I really take this step, I will have a higher chance of success, and I won't act rashly." Dan Yi saw that he had a plan, and he didn't say anything more, and he asked seriously, "Taoist, when do you plan to enter this heavenly pass?" Zhang Yan pondered for a moment before replying, "I still have many unfinished business to attend to, so I have no intention of leaving. However, I won't be delayed for too long." Now that his cultivation had reached this level, it was impossible for him to improve any further. Therefore, there was not much meaning in continuing to wait. However, there were still some problems that needed to be solved in order to take this step. Moreover, the sect also needed to make proper arrangements. Dan Yi said, "When I return, I will naturally discuss this matter with the two fellow Taoists. It's just that this trial is extremely dangerous, so fellow Taoists must be extremely cautious." Following which, he cupped his hands respectfully and his divine intent retreated. Zhang Yan also withdrew his divine decree. After going to the broken world, he felt that the first thing he needed to deal with was the invisible force that changed his perception. Of course, when he embarked on this path, he might not encounter the same situation. However, there were no records of predecessors that he could refer to. He could only rely on himself to explore. Therefore, he had to be prepared for such possible obstacles. He already had a few ideas about this. One of the more reliable ones was to worship the ancestral master. It was difficult to know how powerful the Weili force was. Without any reference, he could only estimate it as high as possible. In that case, he might not be able to resist it by himself. However, as long as he was related to the great underworld ancestral master, the force could only suppress him if it interfered with the karma or reversed the great underworld ancestral master's perception. After Zhang Yan gave it some careful thought, he felt that there was no need for him to take such an action. Because this was his own path towards the Tao, and if he were to rely on the protection of the founding ancestor, then it would be equivalent to having fear in his heart. Then how could he ascend to the next realm? Moreover, it was not that he did not have any other ideas. Other than the Chi Path avatar, he also had the Strength Path avatar. The two were actually one. If he really had the power to reverse perception, he would have to manipulate both the Chi Path and the Strength Path avatar at the same time. However, the Strength Path avatar and the Chi Path avatar had different sources of power. Moreover, there was the support of an unknown object from the entire anti-heaven and earth. It was not that easy to shake. As long as he placed his thoughts here, even if there was such a Weili influence, it could be restored in an instant. However, this was still not enough, because how could one know just how far that power had gone? There was still one more, behind that anti-heaven and earth. It was behind the anti-heaven and earth, and it might also involve another unknown existence. Therefore, he had a more reliable method that did not need to rely on anyone. That was to use the remnant jade. It could truly reflect everything about oneself. As long as he created a technique and mixed it into his own Tao technique, when he reached the upper realm, even if his knowledge was really distorted, once he entered the remnant of the jade to deduce it in the future, as long as he inadvertently used this technique, then he could immediately awaken in the remnant of the jade. After that, he could use it to distort the present world and awaken. Of course, this was only a last resort. It would be best if he could not be affected by external forces. He also thought of this. Right now, his disciples were all protected by him. The aura of other true yang cultivators would not be able to affect them. However, if he left, it might not be the case. Even if he had Dan Yi, Michihito Ichido, Fu Qingming and the others to take care of him, he was not their disciple after all. There was still a layer of separation. It was best to wait for sect leader Qin to cultivate true yang. Then, it would be foolproof. However, this was not something that could be done in a short period of time. Moreover, it was very difficult to achieve this. Even with sect leader Qin's foundation, there was great hope, but it might not necessarily succeed. Therefore, he had to think of other ways. He thought for a while and decided to use two methods. One was to use my own Weili to create a magic power avatar to guard this place. The second was to pass down a technique so that he could defend his foundation at a critical moment. That way, there would be no problems. As long as the Tao did not collapse, then it could be maintained until he succeeded and returned. When he thought of this, he suddenly thought that after his cultivation and magic power improved again, he could try to subdue the Tai Golden Pearl. Otherwise, if it stayed in the Kunshe continent, there would be endless troubles. Moreover, if he really went to the Muddy Sky, then with this treasure, he could use it to protect the Tao. However, the Tai Golden Pearl was not an arcane artifact that he was good at. Therefore, he decided to solve the matter of the arcane artifact first. Therefore, with a thought, a rainbow flashed. The Qinghong sword was reflected in the divine will, shining with clear light. Ever since he entered the Tao, this sword had always been by his side. Later on, Zhui Yuming used the Shaoqing secret technique to refine it, which gave it the name Qinghong. Later on, it became a true treasure and refined a true spirit. Now, he was determined to take it one step further and make it a Taoist treasure. In the past, this was an extravagant hope. Because practically all the Tao treasures in the world were made from natural materials and treasures of the heavens and the earth, and all of these treasures had experienced a myriad of years. Coupled with the refinement and nourishment of these treasures, it required a great deal of effort, so it was absolutely not something that could be easily visualized. For example, if a treasure was not old enough, if a true yang cultivator wanted to use it, they would have to visualize it for tens of thousands of years, or even hundreds of millions of years. This was not a small burden to them, because the future was endless. The further it extended, the more complicated the variables would be, and the more they would have to consume. The number of changes could almost reach infinite. Most importantly, if they were not careful, it might even involve a lot of karma. But it was different now. His magic power had reached the boundless realm, so he was naturally not restricted by this, and the karma of the world could not shake him. Now, as long as he visualized it in the divine will, he could instantly turn the sword into a Taoist treasure. Speaking of which, although Taoist treasures were miraculous, and a true yang cultivator could use one to suppress his peers, it was nothing in front of him. After all, he was someone who could face a primordial supreme treasure like the Tai Golden Bead head-on. A true yang cultivator could visualize things that did not exceed their level, but his level had already leaped above a Taoist treasure, so from this aspect, there was naturally no hindrance to what he was doing. While he was refining the sword in the divine will, Bu Su was in Heaven Wasteland domain. Bai Wei was here as a guest. Seeing that the surroundings were incomparably empty, he said meaningfully, "Why don't you add some decorations?" Deng Zhang was sitting opposite him at this moment, and indifferently replied, "What's the use of adding more decorations if one's heart is filled with external things?" Bai Wei sighed, "Even if you don't move, but if others want to move, what can you do?" He and Deng Zhang could speak here, because not long ago they had received news from Qi Yao and the others. They said that they had already made an agreement with the human Tao, and from now on, they would only fight for Yuan Jade, and other than that, they would no longer be involved in anything that would hinder the human Tao. It could be said that they had drawn a boundary between them. Deng Zhang calmly said, "This is not surprising. After experiencing several changes, these three people are already afraid of the human Tao, and no longer believe in the future, so they have joined the human Tao." Bai Wei probed, "Then does fellow Taoist have the intention to join the human Tao?" Deng Zhang said, "The human Tao is strong, and there is no difference whether I join or not." He looked at Bai Wei, "Does Guangsheng Tianzuan have the intention?" Bai Wei smiled, "Fellow Taoist Deng should know that the karma between me and the human Tao is not small. Even if I am willing to join, this generation may not be willing to accept me." Deng Zhang said, "Looking at Guangsheng Tianzuan's appearance, he does not seem to have any worries." Bai Wei smiled again, "That is because I have thought through one thing." Deng Zhang said, "I would like to ask for your advice." Bai Wei said, "Fellow Taoist once cultivated in the old era, I wonder if there was anyone who tried to ascend to the upper realm?" Deng Zhang said, "Quite a few." Bai Wei asked again, "Then how many people have obtained the upper realm?" Deng Zhang thought for a moment, then said, "As far as I know, there is no one." Bai Wei looked at him, "Then does fellow Taoist think that Taoist Zhang has a chance to ascend to the upper realm?" Deng Zhang was silent for a moment, then said in a low voice, "Yes." Bai Wei's voice suddenly became a little erratic, saying, "Even in the last era, I have never seen someone as powerful as Taoist Zhang. But this person has cultivated to this realm, so he will definitely pursue the upper realm. If he fails in his pursuit of the Tao, what does fellow Taoist think will happen to the human Tao?" Deng Zhang knew the outcome of those who pursued the upper realm. If they failed, perhaps the Taoist would disappear like the others before him. If that happened, then the human Tao would lose a giant arm that could prop up the heavens, and they would be moving away a huge mountain that was pressing down on their heads. He said slowly, "If it is as we think, then it is good. But has fellow Taoist ever thought that if that Taoist Zhang achieves the upper realm, then we will never be able to rise again?" Bai Wei sighed, saying, "So what? We are already unable to stop him. What happens next is up to the will of the heavens." Chapter 1890. Within Zhang Yan's will, all the essences merged and gathered together. With a thought, this place was like a golden furnace forging, once again refining the clear swan sword. As his Yuan Qi and divine will continued to be consumed, countless Kunshe treasures were produced. In an instant, billions of years passed, and they were absorbed into the refinement. During this refinement process, the impurities were eliminated, and the essence was gradually refined. After an indescribable amount of time, he suddenly heard a clear and melodious sword cry, and it lingered for a long time. He knew that it was done, so he guided it with his mind and brought it into the world, and it instantly fell into his palm. He looked over and saw that it was like a ball of starlight, but also like flowing light. At this moment, with just a thought, it could turn into a surging flood and slash apart the universe. It could be restrained as one wished, yet it could also gather fine radiance and attach it to the hair of one's body. At this moment, the Qing Hong sword had become a Taoist treasure. Other than things like the elephant dragon golden furnace, Taoist treasures usually didn't need their own consciousness, so their original spirit didn't exist. However, if he needed to use it, he could summon it out. At his level, there was no need to make a clear distinction between what was and what wasn't. It was there when he wanted it, and it disappeared when he wanted it. Every single Taoist treasure had its own miraculousness, and all the Taoist treasures in the human Tao's possession were like that. This was something that came with it when it was condensed, and even he couldn't easily change it. At this moment, when he carefully examined it, he was already aware of the details. The sword had many abilities, and one of them suited him. It could slash the future and cut off the vitality of the opponent. only one would land in front of him. This way, even if he didn't barge into the opponent's energy ocean, he would be able to get rid of the opponent. Compared to the yin-yang pure seal, it couldn't be said to be superior. It could only be said that each had their own way of using it, and this sword's attack was the most suitable for him. In reality, if the yin-yang pure seal landed on the first owner, its power would be far stronger than when it was held by others. After using the sword for a moment, he nodded his head. With a thought, the flowing light disappeared and returned to his will. For other Taoist treasures, unless one was like Bai Wei and the other Xiantian demons, they wouldn't be able to merge with his will. The difference was obvious. However, with his current qi, he could think of a way to reverse this. Thinking up to this point, he took out the yin-yang pure seal from his sleeve. After staring at it for a moment, this treasure turned from solid to incorporeal, and then disappeared with a whoosh. He had also hidden it in his divine will. However, with the Qing Hong sword, there was no need for him to put in the effort to change it. Because no matter what, it was already fixed, and it would not be as convenient to use as the former. This was only done to make it convenient for him to bring it away when the time came. After dealing with this matter, he changed his mind and flew towards the Kunchi continent. He instantly landed on the star platform that was suppressing the Tai golden bead. He was going to deal with the Khanate cardinal treasure. He sat down nearby and strengthened the seal first. This was to prevent the altar from shaking before he could subdue this treasure. This time, he began to sort out the qi meridians of the restrictions and connected them to the Kunshe continent. This way, he could use the continent itself to disperse the power of the collision. After this, if a Khanate cardinal treasure was born in the future, he could still suppress it here. Once everything was settled, he raised his hand and pressed down. A vast amount of magic power surged into the seal. In the blink of an eye, 2 years had passed. If the Tai golden bead could be fully used now, the two of them could at least be evenly matched. However, it could not control its master. Even if it had the immeasurable Weili, it could not be used to fight against him. Before this, he had already worn down a lot of this treasure's essence, qi, and nature. And now, the consciousness that had been triggered from the future had almost disappeared. Therefore, he could no longer see the Taoist priest Daoi who had stirred up trouble in the future. This was because this consciousness had already disappeared. Even if someone used a spell to guide it in the future, the consciousness that came out would not be the same as before. It could only be another person. But now that it was in his hands, there would no longer be such a possibility. Moreover, he believed that the power of a Khanate cardinal treasure was extremely great. It was not personally refined by a cultivator and was born naturally. No one would be able to control it. Therefore, it was best for this kind of treasure not to have a consciousness. Even if it did, he would find a way to erase it. Unless it was like Lady Ji, who was gentle and afraid of trouble and would not come out to cause trouble. But just because she did not have any ambition, it did not mean that she would not be used. Therefore, he thought that before he officially left, he had to make a backup plan, just in case. At this time, the Tai golden bead was completely powerless to resist. He reached out and took it out. At this moment, he suddenly felt that the world in front of him was somewhat different from what he had seen in the past. He looked at the long river of Tianji and found that many of its tributaries had now disappeared. This was because after this treasure fell into his hands, the future that could have been derived from it was cut off and would never appear again. And among these many futures, the Tai golden bead was an important force that could originally affect the general situation. Now that it suddenly disappeared, the universe was naturally shaken. In reality, only almighty beings like him would be able to sense all of this. Because logically speaking, they were able to survive until the end of all living things, so they could sense all changes. However, for ordinary cultivators, this had nothing to do with them. After putting the Tai golden bead into his sleeve, he turned around and returned to the Qinghuan Palace. Then, he pointed at the empty space below the palace. With a flash of spiritual light, he released Taoist 1K for the 3rd time. He said, "Have you thought it through?" This time, Taoist 1K did not avoid it. Instead, he said, you are right. Even if I dissuade you, if you still want to go there when the cycle of time comes, I might as well tell you the reason. Zhang Yan smiled faintly. He knew in his heart that the other party would have to compromise with him sooner or later. Firstly, he would eventually reach the upper realm. Secondly, if the other party was useless, then there would be no value in staying. Taoist Wan Ke said, if you return Bushutian Weili, it will not be difficult for you to enter the glimpse truth path. I believe that you already know how to enter the upper state. Zhang Yan nodded and said, I have already sensed it. Do you think there is anything wrong with it? Taoist Wan Ke shook his head and said, this is the right path. What you have sensed is not wrong. However, the problem lies after taking this step. Zhang Yan's expression was normal as he said, then what is the crux? Taoist Wan Ke said in a low voice, the upper state does not exist in the present world. If you do not go there, it will forever be an illusion. If you go there, the upper state will become reality and you will be an illusion. Zhang Yan was deep in thought. Although this person's words were vague, it was not difficult for him to understand the meaning of this with his current cultivation. What this person meant was that if he did not walk this path, then everything related to the upper realm would not exist in the present world. The non-existence here did not depend on the distance, nor did it depend on whether it existed or not in one's heart. It was truly non-existent. No matter where one went, one would not be able to find it, because it was impossible to find something that did not exist in the world. In other words, in this world, there was no spirit ascension realm above true yang. Unless someone could open the door to the upper state, then all of this would be real. There was no conflict between the two sides. It was just that this could not be measured by common sense. For those who could break through the barrier between reality and illusion, the boundary here was not so clear. Taoist Wan Ke continued, when I passed through this barrier that day, I saw in the vision of the future. Whether I succeed or not, everything in the world that I am involved with will disappear from the present world. Zhang Yan's eyes flickered and he said, you once said that I's action of climbing to the upper state would not only bring disaster to myself, but would also implicate my disciples and even the living beings of the world. Is this also the reason? Taoist Wan Ke said in a low voice, yes, as long as you do this, then everything in the present world will be destroyed. There are your disciples and the living beings of the world among them. It was not difficult for Zhang Yan to understand what he meant. In the end, this was erasing his past. It could be said that because he was a true young almighty being, the constellations were all under his control. These people were all related to him, and the people he interacted with daily were also almighty beings of the same realm. These people and things could be counted as his past. Now, he had even implicated the world, so if these were all erased, it would not only be the 9 continents, but the entire present world might not exist anymore. He thought for a moment and said, is this why you lost your life? Wan Ke Taoist said, that's right. Back then, after I foresaw such an outcome, I struggled and decided to give up my Tao and retreat. This also caused my true body to no longer exist in this world. Fortunately, I did have a backup plan at that time. I had already borrowed the power of Bushutian, which was how I managed to preserve a strand of essence until today. After a pause, he said seriously, the reason why I stopped you earlier was also because of this. Zhang Yan smiled and did not deny it. He thought that if Taoist Wan Ke really had the confidence to reach the upper state that day, then he would definitely not care about the survival of the living beings of the world. Moreover, based on his deduction, it should not be difficult for people of such a realm to revisit the past and reflect everything that they had lost. So Taoist Wan Ke must have encountered an obstacle that he thought was difficult to overcome. Saying this now was just to find an excuse for himself. Just to stop him for the living beings of the world. This reason was too fake, there must be some other reason. But he did not need to expose him, after all, he still needed to learn more from him. He tried to ask again, but Taoist Wan Ke seemed to think that he had said enough, and once again kept his mouth shut. Zhang Yan did not force him. He smiled and sent him back with a wave of his sleeve. This time, he could feel that this person did not tell him everything he knew, or was hiding something. First, this person was not willing to tell his origin, nor did he say how he could reach this step. Since the 3 eras of the human path, there were many people with amazing talent. Why was this person the only one who could see the upper state? He believed that there must be a reason. His gaze deepened. Although he was not willing to say it all at once, he had finally dug out something. As long as he had enough patience, it would not be difficult to find more clues. Chapter 1891. Zhang Yan believed that part of what Taoist 1K had said was true, but there were many discrepancies between what he said and what really happened. If the crux of the matter was concealed, then the result would be very different. The main reason this person had done this was to make him understand the danger here and retreat. Unfortunately, he was fated to not stop. The pursuit of the great Tao was still seeking transcendence, but the existence of those in the upper realms made this meaningless. Because whether the upper realms were willing or not, in terms of ability, the upper realms could control the latter at will. It was not an exaggeration to say that they could kill and take their lives. The higher one's cultivation was, the more they could not tolerate this. So he could understand why Lu Hua, Feng Chan, and the others wanted to reach the upper realms. Even if they knew it was dangerous, they were willing to fight for that sliver of a chance. Because after they reached True Yang, they would obtain eternal life, but as long as someone in the upper realms appeared, they could easily turn them to dust. However, all of their cultivations had been painstakingly cultivated, so if all of this could vanish in the blink of an eye, then how could they accept it? They would definitely think of ways to reach the great Tao. As a disciple of the Qinsong, and with the great underworld ancestral master above him, he did not seem to have to worry about such things. But even if he put aside his desire to seek Tao and transcendence, he would not put his safety in the hands of others. For example, Bai Wei and the others were clearly defeated by the human Tao, but they were unwilling to be tamed. They wanted to break free of the restraints, and even made some small moves. This was the reason. After thinking for a long time in the hall, he decided to put Taoist 1K's words aside. Before he took that step, he would do as his own people did. After thinking for a long time, he came to the Kun residence to see if he could find anything valuable here. Ever since last time, he knew that he could not obtain any further techniques here. But this time, he wanted to try and see if he could find clues related to the upper realms. He sat down and began to meditate. In the past, as long as he willed it, it wouldn't take long before the object related to his thoughts would appear in front of him. However, this time, even after a long time had passed, nothing appeared in the abode. He understood in his heart that he wouldn't be able to find what he wanted here. Fortunately, he had another breakthrough point. So he got up and called out in his heart, "Is Taoist Ding Zhao here?" After a while, the figure of a huge Kun appeared. The huge figure stopped not far away from him. This was the reflection of the Jade Kun Ying's divine will. He said, "Overlord, I wonder why you called me out." Zhang Yan said, "Back then, fellow Taoist used this place as the ancestral abode of the ancestral master. I'm sure fellow Taoist has met the ancestral master and his ancestors." Ying Zhao replied, "Of course I do." Zhang Yan asked, "Fellow Taoist, I'd like to ask, what else did the patriarch and the seniors in the sect do in the past other than cultivating luck techniques?" Ying Zhao said, "Usually it's to discuss the scriptures, or to search for Tao." Zhang Yan continued, "Do you still remember what patriarch and everyone said when he was explaining the Tao?" Ying Zhao said with certainty, "Of course I remember. Even though I don't really understand some of the theories, I still remember them well." Zhang Yan's heart moved slightly, so he asked a few questions. Ying Zhao was indeed not boasting, he did remember the Tao discussions, but only the discussions. Most of them were about how to advance to True Yang and what to do after True Yang, but none of them were about how to pursue the path of spirit refinement. He pondered for a while, it was still hard to know what the great underworld patriarch's realm was like. However, it should only be his clone that appeared in front of the disciples. It was just that this patriarch did not mention anything about the upper realm, either he thought it was unnecessary, or he intentionally avoided it. The former was fine, but if it was the latter, then the patriarch's attitude was really worth pondering. Seeing that there was nothing else for him to investigate, he bade farewell to Ing Zhao and left. This time, his consciousness shifted to the path of strength. After entering the heavenly barrier, even if he could achieve the great art of spirit refinement, it would be the achievement of the chi path dharma body, and it would have nothing to do with the path of strength. However, because the two were originally one, there was a high chance that they would go to the upper realm together. However, he was thinking if he could find a way to enter the 8th realm. Even if he did not cultivate it now, this realm was on the same level as the path of spirit refinement, and he might be able to peek into some secrets. However, he had no idea how to go further in the path of spirit refinement. The strength path avatar was still accumulating power, and it looked like it was far from reaching its limit. Therefore, it was impossible for it to reach the level of the chi path avatar in such a short period of time. It seemed like the time for the next opportunity had yet to arrive. Actually, with his spiritual power, he could follow the meridian of the path of spirit refinement and see a trace of the future. Maybe he would be able to obtain the secret of the 8th realm rotation. Because the future was endless, if he did that, he would be giving up on the masses. In other words, his future would be decided, and he would be able to gain benefits for a while, but in the long run, it was not appropriate. Of course, if he really reached the upper realm, he might be able to jump out of such restraints. However, this was just a guess, and there might be more hidden dangers. Therefore, this was actually a huge gamble, and he did not want to take it. Here, he had another train of thought. After he defeated all the owners of the demon treasury throughout the ages, the wali behind him had been trying to support him, and even gave him many conveniences. There must be a reason for this, and there must be a purpose for it. From the looks of it, the owner of the demon treasury was also unfathomable, and should be someone of the upper realm. Therefore, unless he could reach this realm, he would not even be able to talk to the other party. If so, the other party might have left some opportunity in the anti-heaven and earth. Although these were just his guesses, it was worth a try. Moreover, he could use this opportunity to verify one thing. If he could not find this method, then there was no need to say more. However, if he could find it, it meant that this person was very likely to be watching him. Therefore, when he looked for it, it took the initiative to come to him. After making up his mind, he turned his consciousness and entered the anti-heaven and earth. It was still almost chaotic here, and other than that unknown thing, there was nothing else. However, with the experience of watching Bushutian, he knew what to do. He tried to search deep into the world. Very quickly, he came into contact with 3 consciousnesses. These were 3 demon masters that had not yet been born. The karma of the heavens had not arrived, so they had not yet entered the world. He did not touch them, and continued to search deeper. However, no matter how deep he immersed himself, there was no response. It was as if there were no more secrets here. He opened his eyes, and his consciousness retreated from within. He pondered for a while, and could not find anything. This result was neither good nor bad. This meant that he needed to reach the 8th level of the divine realm, so he had to continue waiting. The owner of the demon treasury was obviously not paying attention to him, or in other words, the power left in this world might not be able to affect him anymore. He thought about it, and since he did not find any useful clues in the 2 paths, he would have to find Taoist Wan Ke to ask. However, there was no need to do so frequently, as that would make him seem too impatient. He could just look for this person after a while. With a thought, he turned to the Kunsher continent again. This time, he went straight to the Bai division. Now, this was no longer a tribe, but a country. It was also the largest settlement outside of the old territories of the human path. Because the people here were proficient in special techniques, and with the protection of the divine monarch, not only could they defend an area, but they could also suppress the ferocious beasts in all directions. The tribes of the other races also did not dare to come close. Ji Shi was compiling a book. Ever since he entered the Bai division a few hundred years ago, he had taught many disciples, and many of them had left behind writings. However, in his opinion, there were many flaws, so he decided to write a few volumes himself, and modified the previous ones so that they could be passed down from generation to generation, and be used for imparting techniques. Imparting techniques was not the same as imparting Tao. It was just that after training Qi, one could obtain some talisman making and special techniques. For proper cultivation, one still had to go deep into the mountains to find Taoists. After a long time, he finished another volume. He put down the paper and ink, and held it up for a while before putting it down satisfactorily. At this moment, he suddenly realized that everything around him had quietened down as if everything was frozen. He had a similar experience before. With a thought, he straightened his clothes and walked out of the door. Looking up, he saw a black-robed Taoist standing there. He hurriedly bowed and said, "Greetings, Xianyuan Exalted." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "No need to stand on ceremony." Ji Shi was slightly perturbed and asked, "May I know what orders Exalted has for me?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I'm here for a matter. I might go to a realm after this, so I have no time to care about the matters of the world. I'm here to ask you something." Ji Shi hurriedly said, "Please speak, Exalted." Zhang Yan said, "You are the innate cardinal treasure of this era. If you want to become a treasure body in the future, I will have to take you away for a period of time to prevent others from taking advantage of you." He had already placed a talisman on Ji Shi, so no one could find him. Bai Wei and Deng Zhang couldn't do anything now, but that didn't mean that nothing would happen to the world. Taoist Wan Kei's background was unknown, and Bushutian might have other secrets hidden within him. Thus, he couldn't let his guard down. He would rather be cautious and cut off all possibilities first. Then, he wouldn't have to worry about anything else. Ji Shi carefully asked, "If I don't become a treasure body, can I not leave?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Of course you can, but I will seal your qi activity so that no one can open it. If you want to in the future, I will help you when I return." Ji Shi bowed and said firmly, "I am willing to do so." Zhang Yan looked at him and said, "You have to think it through." Ji Shi said firmly, "I have thought it through. Please grant my wish, Exalted Exalted." Zhang Yan nodded and waved his sleeve. A clear light rose and entered Ji Shi's body like water or a sword, freezing his qi activity. In the future, without his permission, or someone whose mana was stronger than him, they wouldn't be able to break the seal. According to Wan Kei Taoist, once he reached the upper realm, everything in the world would turn into an illusion. It seemed meaningless to do so, but no one knew what the actual situation would be like. He couldn't just sit back and do nothing just because of a few words. He would continue to make arrangements for his original plans, and once everything was settled, he would truly take that step. Chapter 1892. Zhang Yan did not go out for the next few days. Instead, he stayed in the Qinghuan Palace to study cultivation methods. In order to prevent the external Weili from changing his perception when he was breaking through, he had to prepare a few backup plans. One of them was to gather his thoughts and throw them into the anti-heaven and earth. At this moment, numerous worlds were born in his divine decree. Then, countless stars gathered from all directions and condensed into a single point. However, this was only the beginning. Following this, all the dark and chaotic objects in the surroundings were also sinking towards this point. Billions of years passed quickly, but his consciousness was still immersed in it and maintained this point. When he sensed that it was impossible to gather and condense, he knew that he'd arrived at his limit. If he continued, then it would be another change, and it was even to the extent that his original thoughts would disperse. That wasn't what he wanted. So, he stretched out his hand and his gaze descended onto it. After a short moment, he was able to see through it. It seemed as if his hand was completely empty, but in reality, there was a practically indistinguishable speck of dust in that extremely fine place. It carried boundless energy, yet its origin energy was restrained within it, and not a trace of it leaked out from it. This thing was like a hard shell outside of his thoughts, so that a trace of his original self was firmly protected inside. But this was far from enough. If he were to fight against the mighty force from beyond the heavens, he believed that it would be difficult for him to win. No matter how sturdy this thing was, it could still be worn down and broken. Therefore, his choice this time was not to use brute force to fight to the end, but to take the path of entrust. He gently waved his sleeve and this thing fell into the anti-heaven and earth. Not long after, it mixed with many other unknown things and melted into it. There was no longer any trace left. In this way, if he encountered external forces that tried to change his perception when breaking through, he would use the endless unknown things in the anti-heaven and earth to help him resist. Either the other party destroyed it in one fell swoop, or it would be difficult to shake it. In fact, there was another thing he could rely on here. Although he did not come here to find the next cultivation method, the anti-heaven and earth must still be hiding the secrets of the owner of the Devil Trove. Otherwise, when he reached the highest level of cultivation, he would not be able to go any further without the cultivation method. Therefore, if he wanted to completely overwhelm the anti-heaven and earth, he would have to erase the layout of the owner of the Devil Trove. But in the end, this was still borrowing power, and the result was uncertain. Who knew what the owner of the demonic treasury would do? If he backed down, then he would be at the mercy of the Whaley. In the end, he still had to rely on himself. He first retreated from the divine decree and sorted out his chi activity before entering it again. This time, he had to deduce a cultivation technique that could maintain his original self and allow it to completely fuse with the original Tao technique. Moreover, in his imagination, this Tao art should not only be used to defend against the ability to distort one's perception, but it should also be fused with other effects. In this way, just now, it didn't seem to be unnecessary, and it could even be used by him during ordinary times. After his mana reached the boundless state, he was almost omnipotent. Other than being unable to involve the upper realm, there seemed to be nothing that he couldn't do in the present world. But being able to do it didn't mean that there were no shortcomings. Therefore, he decided to avoid it this time. This Tao art was not strange. There were opponents and even people of the same path who had used it before. Even some talismans and supernatural powers had this ability. In general, this was the art of giving wishes. There was also another name for it, which was seeing karma immediately. For example, when he was dealing with an opponent, his strength surpassed his opponent, but he couldn't finish him off quickly. Then, after obtaining this Tao art, as long as he was sure that he could defeat or kill the opponent in the future, and there was a high possibility that he could do it, then he would be able to get the result in an instant. For example, the ability of the Tai Golden Bead. It wasn't difficult for him to do it, but he wasn't a talisman after all. At the beginning, he couldn't blast it out like it could. He needed to first visualize it in the divine will and deduce the method to use it. If he had this method, he could bypass this hurdle. In this way, he would be able to use his endless mana almost perfectly. However, there was no such thing as a free lunch in this world. Therefore, the mana and divine will consumed would not be less, but more. Therefore, at the moment, he was the only one who could use it. If it was someone else, even if they knew how to cultivate it, they wouldn't be able to do it. After deducing this Tao art in the divine will, he first fused it with the original Tao art. Then, he immersed his mind into the broken jade and focused the reflection of his current body here. After finishing this, he retreated and began to work on the next matter. After leaving, there was no one to protect his disciples, so he needed to leave behind a clone. A normal true Yang clone was definitely not enough to take on this responsibility, so he needed to pour in enough power. His expression became serious. After a while, under the push of the endless mana, after half a year, a shadow gradually appeared behind him. Looking at it, it was a Taoist. His appearance was 70 to 80% similar to him. He slowly stood up and walked to the bottom of the stairs and stood in the hall. However, avatars were only avatars after all. From the moment they were formed, their aura was constantly weakening. It was easy to imagine that one day, they would completely disappear. Because they didn't have a foundation, the more powerful they were, the faster they would disappear. He wasn't sure when he could return. If this clone disappeared first, it wouldn't be appropriate. Therefore, he flipped his wrist and stretched out a finger. After a while, a drop of blood gradually appeared in the void and stopped on the tip of his finger. This was obtained from the body of the Taoist. With a light flick, he sent it into his doppelganger, and it quickly fused with the dense mana. If the clone looked a little erratic before, now it was as if he was sitting there. From this moment on, the clone had the strength of both chi and power. Not only could it use spiritual opportunity, but it could also refine indescribable objects. This allowed it to exist for a long time, and its strength was no less than that of an ordinary true yang expert. He pondered for a moment, waved his sleeve, and a white light flew into the clone. To ensure safety, he took out the yin-yang pure seal and handed it to the clone. At the same time, he said, "When I'm not here, you will guard the all heavens constellation for me." The clone cupped his hands and bowed. In a flash, he had already opened up a cave mansion in Xianyuan heaven and settled down. Zhang Yan glanced there, nodded slightly, and then withdrew his gaze. After sitting for a moment, he gently snapped his fingers and a bell rang out. His Highness flashed and released Daoist 1K for the third time. This time, he didn't treat this person as a prisoner. Instead, he raised his hand and gestured to the side, saying, "Why don't you sit down and talk?" Taoist 1K didn't stand on ceremony. He sat down on the guest seat and said, "What do you want to ask me this time?" He was very clear that a person like Zhang Yan would definitely not give up on his original plan just because of a few words from him. Even if there were obstacles in front of him, he would still do everything possible to find a solution. This time, he must have asked him to come out to find out more. Zhang Yan sat on the platform, looking at him and said, "After hearing what you said that day, I went back and thought about it. I think that if the method is appropriate, we can avoid those dangers." Taoist 1K paused, then slowly said, "Oh. Then I'll have to ask." Zhang Yan smiled. "Speaking of which, this isn't what I thought. The method is actually in what you said last time. I heard you say that when you peeped into the upper realm, you placed a part of yourself in Busu Tian. Since that is the case, you know that Busu Tian's power can help you resist the upper realm, right?" Taoist 1K was silent for a moment before he said, "This is certainly possible, but if it fails, Busu Tian's Weili will not be able to protect him. As I said before, if you insist on doing it, it's best if you repeat my mistakes." Zhang Yan said, "But what if I reach the upper realm? What will happen after I reach the upper realm? I'm afraid you can't be sure, and those words were just your speculation." Taoist 1K looked over and said in a low voice, "You should know that in front of us, there is a fine line between the future and speculation. Otherwise, why would I forcibly retreat when I was about to succeed? Also, doesn't the fact that I lost my original body prove my previous speculation?" Zhang Yan smiled. He waved his sleeves, and a cup of spirit tea appeared on the seats of the host and guest. Just the fragrance alone was enough to cleanse one's mind. He said, "This is the tea that I was served by the boy when I went to exalted Feng Chan's cave abode. It can be used to solidify one's dharmakaya. Why don't you take a sip?" Taoist 1K did not refuse, immediately picking it up and taking a sip. In the past, when he had Bushutian's endless Weili to rely on, he naturally had no use for these things. But now, it was only formed from damaged essence qi, and his body was constantly flowing away. This spirit tea was planted by Feng Chan, and it was very beneficial for stabilizing one's dharmakaya. As long as he did not want to die, he had to accept this benefit. At this moment, Zhang Yan did not linger on the topic from before. Instead, he changed the topic and said, "There's something I don't understand. In the past, there were many mighty figures who tried to find the way to the upper realm, but none of them succeeded. In fact, no one seemed to have even touched the gate. You are the only one who managed to climb to the top, yet you are still alive in this world. Then, can you answer my questions? Where did you get the method to ascend to the heavens?" He thought that nothing in the world would happen for no reason, and that Taoist 1K could do what ordinary people could not. There must be a reason behind it. Taoist 1K said, "So you want to ask about this? Most of my past memories were left with my original body. I'm afraid what I know now will not satisfy you." Zhang Yan smiled and said, tell me as much as you can remember. He understood in his heart that even if this person had lost many things in his memories, he would definitely remember matters regarding the upper realm. That was because those were the most important things, and this person would definitely try to retain them so that they wouldn't be lost. That was exactly what he wanted to know. Chapter 1893. After listening to Zhang Yan's words, Taoist Wan Ke thought for a while and nodded slightly. He said slowly, I am also a human cultivator. When I was young, I became a disciple of the founding master and was imparted with the supreme techniques. There is nothing special about this. Later on, I achieved true yang and thought that I have cultivated to the end of the Tao. From then on, I can live a carefree life. Zhang Yan then said, even if you can't see those in the upper realm, there are still many who are pursuing it. Do you think that this is false? From the fact that Taoist Wan Ke could become a true yang cultivator, his sect must be powerful, so it was impossible for him to know about spirit refinement after becoming a true yang cultivator. He must have heard about it long ago. Taoist Wan Ke shook his head and said, my sect has always been dismissive of the rumors about the upper realm, saying that it is just nonsense. Moreover, my master once told me that if no one can reach this realm, then there is no need to seek it. If someone succeeds, then it is not too late to follow. Our hearts are like the heavens, if we can't see it, then we won't speak. Zhang Yan nodded slightly. The sect behind Taoist Wan Ke firmly believed that the spirit refinement realm did not exist. This was not ignorance, but it was to prevent one's Tao heart from being disturbed, so as not to walk on the path of no return. However, if it was really as Wan Ke said, that one did not seek the upper realm but the supreme realm, then it could not be said that he was wrong. For example, people like Lu Hua and Feng Chan believed that the upper realm existed, so they went through it. However, it could not be said that they were wrong, and there was no need to use the results to determine who was right or wrong. It was just that there was a fundamental difference in their understanding. He said, then what happened? Taoist Wan Ke said, after I succeeded, I talked about Tao every day and gradually felt that the upper realm might not be empty talk. Zhang Yan knew that it was not that he did not follow the teachings of his sect, but because after he became a true yang cultivator, he found his own Tao path, and even the words of his original master could not affect his own will. Taoist Wan Ke continued, later on, I became obsessed with this, but in the years that followed, I couldn't get to the Tao. I thought that I would be like my predecessors and have no hope of reaching this realm, but one day, that day, I was discussing the method of the upper realm with a fellow Taoist. In fact, we had already talked about this many times, and there was nothing new about it. Later on, that fellow Taoist had something to do and needed to leave first, so in order to not take good care of me, he invited me to the library to read books. After reading for a few days, I found a jade slip in a corner, but I didn't expect that it would actually record how to go deep into the beard and use the Weili to ascend to the upper realm. When I saw it, I was extremely shocked, and thought that it was a joke, but later on, I deduced and verified, and found that it was actually feasible. Zhang Yan said, may I know where this jade slip is now? Taoist Wan Ke shook his head and said, after I saw it that day, I wanted to take a closer look, but who knew that it would disappear in the blink of an eye? Later on, I tried to ask that fellow Taoist a few questions, but he didn't know anything, as if he had never seen it before. I suspect that this item might be the legendary world-knowing jade slip, or a damaged part of it. Zhang Yan was a little interested and said, world-knowing jade slip. Is there really such an item? No one knew the origin of the world-knowing jade slip, but according to the legends, there was such a mysterious item in the world that contained all the principles of the world. No matter what you wanted to know, you could search for it. There were many records of this item since ancient times, but most of them were untrustworthy, and the remaining few were also questionable. However, there were rumors. It was very likely that it was the innate cardinal treasure from the first era. Of course, there were many theories about the original form of this innate cardinal treasure, but because no one had seen it before, there were still many speculations. No one could be sure of what it was. Taoist Wan Ke said, this is just my own speculation, because I really can't think of anything else in the world that can help me enter the upper realm other than this. As for why my fellow Taoist didn't see it and only I saw it, I can only say that it's fate. Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, in fact, whether it was the world knowing Jade's slip or not is irrelevant. Taoist Wan Ke agreed, indeed, it is irrelevant. I followed the incantation and successfully borrowed Bushutian's power. I thought that I would be able to use it to succeed, but you know what happened next. Zhang Yan saw that although this person had mentioned this matter, he still didn't talk about the contents of the scroll. He knew that this person was still holding back. However, he didn't mind and said, although you have retreated, you must be unwilling in your heart. If you have another chance, what would you do? Taoist Wan Ke's voice was cold as he said, even if you give me another chance, I definitely won't be able to pass it. I do have some insights here, Zhang Yan said with a smile. He discussed with him about the method to enter the upper realm and told him about his ideas. This was not an aimless talk, and he had carefully calculated it. If the other party wanted to dissuade him, then he would have to come up with a reason to convince him. Since this person was trying to stop him, even if he knew that he was trying to get information out of him, he had no choice but to follow his rhythm. As expected, Taoist Wan Ke immediately retorted after hearing this. The discussion between the two not only involved how to enter the upper realm, but also the understanding of various Tao techniques and supernatural powers. It was almost like a discussion of Tao. In the end, Taoist Wan Ke gradually fell into a disadvantage, but he still held on to the fact that no one had been able to pass the door to the upper realm. Because the ideas that Zhang Yan had put forward could not be proven, he believed that as long as he held on to this point, it would be impossible to refute. In the process, he also found that the basis of Zhang Yan's foundation was that his current strength was far stronger than when he had ascended to the upper realm, and his power was not borrowed from Bushutian, but used for his own use. It seemed like there was no difference, but a slight difference could lead to a completely different result. But he still insisted, although you have won against me, it is not by much. This is not enough to change the situation, and it is impossible to change the situation. Zhang Yan understood what he meant. Although he was stronger than this person, there was not a huge difference between them. When he had Bushutian's Weili, he also had infinite mana, the only difference was in how he used it. He smiled, waved his sleeve, and a golden pearl was placed on the horizontal table in front of him. He said, then what do you think, if you get this thing? Taoist Wan Ke was surprised, Tai golden pearl. He carefully sensed it, but was even more surprised. There was no consciousness in it, which meant that not only did Zhang Yan have this thing, but he had also completely subdued it. This was a huge bargaining chip. If he had had the Tai golden pearl back then, the result would have been very different. This was not to say that the Tai golden pearl would definitely be able to resist the Weili from above, but with a little help, more variables could be created. Not to mention that the primordial cardinal treasure had unlimited power, it could be used as a substitute at a crucial moment, and it might be able to avoid that disaster. At this moment, he had no choice but to admit that Zhang Yan did indeed have a chance to ascend to the upper realm, but that was all to it. It was absolutely impossible for him to encourage Zhang Yan to do such a thing, so he said calmly, it's just that the chances are slightly higher. Zhang Yan said, nothing in the world is perfect. How can seeking the upper realm be a sure thing? If there is a higher chance, it is not bad. Here, he said, if someone dissuaded you back then, would you have stopped? Taoist Wan Ke was silent. Zhang Yan looked at him and said, what you are worried about is that after I ascend to the upper realm, everything will turn into nothingness, and even you will not be able to escape. But if you continue like this, what can you do? You should know that I will not stop, so you should tell me everything you know. If you succeed, you might be able to give you an explanation when you return. Taoist Wan Ke did not speak for a long time, and said after a long time, let me think about it. Zhang Yan nodded slightly. Looking at his attitude, there was still some hope in this matter. He waved his sleeve and sent him back. Although he did not get what he wanted the most this time, the harvest was not small, especially when the other party had really ascended to the upper realm. There were many details that gave him a lot of inspiration, and he needed to think about it carefully. In the following days, he did not go to find him, but gave him enough time to think, while he went into seclusion to organize what he had learned. On this day, he had a feeling that another disciple was about to emerge from seclusion. It was a good thing that he was about to seek the upper realm. In the mountain and sea realm, in a minor realm of the frigid north abyss, Yuan Jianqing sat on a stone dais, a clear aura drifting around him like smoke or mist. The incense burner he sat on was also enshrouded in mist, and his body flickered in and out of existence, almost like an illusory shadow. What he cultivated was the Yuanshan divine cave spirit scripture, and he was most proficient in sensing. Searching for the root fruit was extremely difficult for others, but he found it easily. However, at this moment, he suddenly felt a trace of unease in his heart, and he did not take this step forward. The root fruit seemed to vanish, as if it were about to flee. Normally, if a root fruit was not immediately fused with it, then the next time he tried to find it would be even more difficult. In fact, it was even possible that he would not be able to find it again. However, he trusted his own senses, and did nothing to stop it. It was at this point that the sense of danger in his heart faded away. Suddenly, he realized something, and began to search again. This time, it was a bit more difficult, but it didn't take him long to find it. However, the feeling of unease once again filled him, and he decisively gave up on it. He tried again, each time more difficult than the last. After trying 5 times in a row, he still felt that something was wrong. Without the slightest hesitation, he gave up on it. If it was someone else, that person would have probably compromised a long time ago and wouldn't be willing to persist any longer. However, he didn't shrink back because of this and still insisted on doing so. This time, he had gone through a difficult search to find the root fruit. However, if he felt that something was wrong again, then even if his magic power was running out, he wouldn't give in. As of this moment, his Tao heart had become even more resolute. It had reached an unprecedented level. At the same time, the pressure on his body suddenly retreated and no longer existed. His thoughts were clear. At this moment, he didn't hesitate anymore. He raised his mind and fused with it. His body couldn't help but tremble. In an instant, he felt that the sky and earth were wide open, and the universe was clear. His mind was free, and he could see the boundless distance. The entanglement of the past was completely severed, and there was clear air pouring down from above, cleansing his body, and all kinds of karma disappeared. At this moment, he had already cut off his old body and become immortal. As if he had done something unimportant, he stood up and walked down the stairs. After a few steps, he waved his hand, and a book that recorded everything in the world was brought to him. After a brief look, he knew the changes in these hundreds of years. He couldn't help but exclaim in admiration, and he recited, "The righteousness is vast, and the people are mighty." Recite the Book of Tao in unison, and the 9 continents are the same. The clear sun hangs high in the sky, and shines brightly on the world, and all scenery follows. After he finished reciting, he looked up, and after identifying the direction, he turned into a clear light and leaped up from the ground, breaking through the void, and headed towards the Qinghuan Palace. Chapter 1894. After Yuan Jianqing arrived at Xianyuan Heaven, he used his will to escape and came to the main hall of Qinghuan Palace in a moment. Zhang Chan was already waiting there. He bowed to Yuan Jianqing and said with a smile, "Congratulations on your success. Master is in the hall, you can go now." Yuan Jianqing clasped his hands together and entered the palace. He walked all the way to the main hall and saw the figure on the jade platform. Disciple pays his respects to master. Zhang Yan nodded and smiled. No need to stand on ceremony. Yuan Jianqing straightened up and said in a serious voice, "After coming out of seclusion today, I saw the changes in the outside world for hundreds of years and was quite excited. This time, the people Tao has entered Busu and restored the order of the world. This is all thanks to Master. Disciple congratulates Master, congratulates fellow Taoists, and congratulates all of us." Zhang Yan shook his head. "How can I do this alone?" He was not being humble. Although he had contributed the most in the battle for Busu Tian, it would have been impossible to succeed without a true Yang expert. It was even more impossible to stabilize the situation of the people Dao. He looked down and said, "Since you have severed your mortal body, what is your intention in coming down?" Yuan Jianqing thought about it seriously and said, "Disciple heard that senior sister and senior brother Wei have come out of seclusion and wanted to pay their respects. But disciple feels that there are some shortcomings in my cultivation. After returning, I may need to do more research." Zhang Yan nodded slightly. "What do you think is lacking?" Yuan Jingqing truthfully described the situation when he broke through. In the end, he said, "Disciple thinks that although I achieved mortal shedding this time, I still feel that it was easy. Especially the reason why I achieved it in the end, I still don't understand. Obviously, my cultivation is still lacking." Although he felt that it was extremely difficult to achieve it in the end, compared to the records of the predecessors, he was still slightly inferior. Those predecessors who could reach this realm were also outstanding, and he did not think that he could beat them. Zhang Yan comforted him, "You are able to see through yourself, it can be said that your heart of Tao is upright. Among all the disciples under my tutelage, you, Yenny, and Zihong have the highest aptitude. The present heaven and earth are very different from the past, it is only natural that you succeed in becoming immortal. If you fail, it is because of your own body." On the path to the Tao, the first was external, and the second was internal. Now that he had sent boundless amounts of vital energy into the mountain and sea realm, the mountain and sea realm was filled with unprecedentedly abundant resources for Tao cultivation. You could say that he didn't lack any external resources at all, and even his longevity had been extended. Therefore, if he couldn't succeed, it was either because his foundation vessel was not strong enough, or because his heart was not strong enough to pursue the Tao. However, there is no need for you to be unduly humble. Since the founding of the Qinsang school, you are the only person who has achieved mortal body through the magic of primal dawn. There are no records of it, and it is all your own effort. For you to reach this point is no easy feat." With that, he waved his finger, and a spirit talisman flew into Yuan Jingqing's forehead. "This talisman will help you to use the divine will for 100 years. Use it to study it carefully, and you will be able to make up for any mistakes you may have made." Yuan Jianqing bowed to the seat and said, "Disciple thanks master." Zhang Yan said, "After you have resolved your doubts, you may leave a book behind for future disciples to study." Yuan Jianqing said with a serious expression, "Disciple obeys." This was a custom. If a disciple of the Qinsang school gained something from the 5 techniques and 3 scriptures, then a copy would be left behind in the sect. Currently, the only person who had gained something from the Primal Dawn sensory mantra was Yuan Jianqing, apart from Yan Changsheng, who had broken out of the sect all those years ago. When he returned, he would follow the rules of the sect, and leave a copy in the Temple of Truth and the Golden Pavilion. In the future, if a disciple reached a certain level of cultivation and wished to sever his mortal body, then all they had to do was get permission from Zhang Yan or the sect leader, and they could study it. Zhang Yan said slowly, "Go to the pillar and take a talisman and stick it down." Yuan Jianqing looked around and saw a talisman stuck to a row of pillars to the right. After thinking for a moment, he walked over to one of the pillars and took the talisman off. As soon as he touched it, his heart trembled, and he felt as if this talisman had some kind of connection to him. Zhang Yan said, "What this talisman says concerns you personally. Just keep it carefully, and when the time comes, you will get it." The talisman told him how to sever his own karma, but it was still too early for the next Yuan Yu to enter the world, so there was no need to care about it now. Even if he opened it, it would be blank, and only when the time came would there be a sign. Yuan Jianqing bowed and said, "Disciple obeys." Zhang Yan came down and taught this disciple some secret techniques that he deduced. After talking for a while, he dismissed the disciple. Then, he thought about his 2 disciples who were still in seclusion. Judging from the current situation, there would not be any results before he broke through the realm. However, even if he was not here, he still had his doppelganger. Other than some key secrets, whatever he knew, his doppelganger would also know, so there was no need to worry about it. After thinking, he sat in meditation. His mana would not increase anymore, but after talking with Taoist Wan Ke, he had many ideas, and now that he had time, he could verify them one by one. After sitting like this for a year, he suddenly sensed something, and upon checking, he found that it was Taoist One Quebec. This was the first time this person took the initiative to look for him after being captured. After thinking for a while, he raised his hand and let this person out, and said, "Is it possible that you have thought it through?" After Taoist Wan Ke appeared, he bowed to him and said seriously, "Yes, I have thought it through, and I can tell you what I know, but you have to promise me one thing." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "You can say it clearly." Taoist Wan Ke said in a deep voice, "If you want to go to the upper realm, you need to help me reside in Busu Tian, so even if you fail, Busu Tian can protect me." Zhang Yan couldn't help but ponder. It wasn't difficult to imbue the essence into the cloth, but what he needed to consider was whether or not this person would be able to steal the great power from him again. Although he could use the contract to restrain it, it involved Bushutian, so he had to be more careful. However, he could add another lock here. For example, he could hold Bushutian's power in his hand and guard it with the doppelganger he had created earlier. This way, it would be foolproof. After thinking it through, he said, "I can promise you." Taoist Wan Ke was a little surprised, he did not think that he would agree so easily. However, he was also secretly relieved. He was worried that the two sides could not come to an agreement, and he could only let the other side control his life and death. Now, he got a result that was neither good nor bad. Zhang Yan said, "But Busu Tian's matter is not mine alone, I need to invite a few Taoist friends to come and be witnesses." Taoist Wan Ke did not have any objections, and said, "You can arrange it as you wish." Zhang Yan immediately called out in the divine will, and not long after, the avatars of Dan Yi, Fu Qingming, and Michihito Ichido came to the Qing Huan Palace. He briefly explained the matter, and after the three heard it, they did not have any objections. He waved his sleeve, and in an instant, a golden page flew out and floated on the table. With a point of his finger, he poured his mana and essence qi into it. Dan Yi and the other two did the same, pouring a wisp of magic power and essence into their bodies. Taoist Wan Ke did not hesitate much at this moment. He also separated a strand of his own essence and left it on the contract. As soon as he made the oath, he immediately felt as if something was restraining him, constantly reminding him not to cross the line. The contract contained not only his own mana, but also that of Zhang Yan and the others. If he went against it, he would be attacked by himself and the 4 Yuan Zun of human Tao. Not to mention that he was only a strand of essence qi, even if he still had Busu Tian's Weili, he would still die if he went against it. Zhang Yan bowed to Dan Yi and the others, and said, "Thank you, Taoist friends." Dan Yi knew that Zhang Yan had something else to say, and he was afraid that if he heard it himself, his Tao thoughts might be shaken. After returning the bow, he said, "Taoist friend, you are too kind. If there is nothing else, we will take our leave first." At this moment, Zhang Yan noticed that Taoist Wan Ke looked at Dan Yi very vaguely. He thought for a moment, and after sending Dan Yi and the others away, he asked, "Do you know Taoist friend Dan Yi in the past?" Taoist Wan Ke shook his head and said, "After I awakened from Busu Tian, although I have seen him many times, I have no impression of him after searching through my memories, so I am a little curious about his background. However, I am an incarnation of Essence Qi, and have lost a lot of memory, so it is not surprising that I do not know him. Perhaps one of the Yuan Zun is reincarnated from the Xian stone." Zhang Yan did not comment. The possibility of Dan Yi being the reincarnation of a mighty person was extremely small. Like the Xian stone, once it was born, it would be taken away by other mighty people. If it was a true young mighty person who had died long ago, it would not be possible for him to use this item when the later generations were waiting bitterly. The best result would be to turn into a Tao god. However, this was a small matter. What was Dan Yi's background? The effort he had put in for human Tao could not be faked, so there was no need to look into this matter. With a wave of his sleeve, the contract on the table was split into 2, and he sent one of them to Taoist Wan Ke and said, "Does this count as an explanation to you, Your Excellency?" Taoist Wan Ke put away the contract and nodded at him. He then began to visualize, and after a while, a jade scroll gradually appeared in his hand. After it had completely solidified, he sent it forward. Everything I know, and everything I experienced at that time, is in it. Your Excellency can take a look. Zhang Yan took it, and when his mind entered it, he found that he could directly see everything that Taoist 1K experienced at that time. This was extremely useful. No matter what he knew before was only from the other party's retelling, and there would always be omissions and uncertainties. If he could see it for himself, then he would be able to know the shortcomings and make up for it. Obtaining this item would greatly increase his chances of winning. Since Taoist 1K had agreed, he naturally did not want to see Zhang Yan fail. Thus, he reminded, I am not the original, and what I see here may not be everything. There may even be something wrong, Your Excellency needs to be careful. Zhang Yan nodded slightly, because even Taoist 1K himself was not sure if what he saw was real. However, he believed that the fact that the other party could finally escape and did not let the last trace of essence vanish meant that his idea of relying on Bushutian was correct. At least the possibility of this part of the deviation was not high. Taoist 1K looked at him with a somewhat complicated expression. Finally, he let out a long sigh and shook his head. Your Excellency may really be able to do what I could not. Chapter 1895. One after Zhang Yan received the jade scroll from Taoist 1K, he ordered Jingyu to invite him to a side hall to stay. Since this person had already made a contract, he would not be able to go against People Dao in the future, so there was no need to imprison him again. Jingyu sent Taoist 1K away, and not long after, he returned to the hall and said respectfully, Master, I have settled that person down. Zhang Yan waved his hand and said, You can leave, I will not call you, so there is no need to enter the hall. Jingyu bowed and said yes, then retreated out of the palace. At this moment, only Zhang Yan was left in the empty hall. He sat quietly for a while, then his gaze landed on the table. However, he did not immediately pry into the secrets within. He had to be careful when it came to matters of the upper realm. According to Taoist 1K, when he broke through, it was hard to distinguish between the real and the fake. Although he would only use his gaze to rewatch the situation that day and not do it himself, he had to prevent himself from being implicated if he was not careful, so he had to be prepared beforehand. With a thought, he slowly sent a strand of his primordial essence into the deepest part of Busu's body. It was as if he had taken root in it, even if his primordial essence dissipated. As long as he did not lose even a little bit of it, he would be able to recover. At the same time, he sank a strand of spirit into it. This way, if others wanted to borrow Busu Tian's Weili, they would have to go through him. If they were of the same path, they would not be stopped. If it was someone with evil intentions, such as someone like Taoist 1K, they would not be able to go together. Before he officially ascended to the upper realm, he would let his clone control this Weili, so that no one could steal it. When he was done, he stretched out his hand and took the jade slip again. At the same time, Bai Wei, who was cultivating in the mystic Kong realm, suddenly woke up from his meditation, and felt that the world seemed to have changed again. He tried to divine it, but there was no result. But now, there was only one person who could cause the universe to change, and he could not divine it. He thought to himself, in that case, it's very likely that this person is going to take that step. At this moment, he was half happy and half worried. If Zhang Yan really left and completely disappeared from the modern world, then he would no longer have to act according to the people's wishes. However, if he reached the upper realm, he would never be able to make a comeback and he would not be able to revive the other Khanate fiendish demons. At this moment, he felt the arrival of a spirit, so he immediately turned inexplicable and said to the person who came, Fellow Taoist Deng, you must have sensed the change in heaven and earth. Deng Zhang said, Fellow Taoist, didn't you already expect this? Bai Wei said, if he doesn't succeed, then that's for the best. If he succeeds, then he might not bother with the matters of the lower realms anymore. Deng Zhang said, after I parted ways with you, I went to a few cave residences left behind by a fellow cultivator in the void primordial sea in the second era. Bai Wei said, oh. Is there something different about this place? Normal people could not enter the Zhenyang legacy residence, and it was useless to them, especially those who were not in Busu heaven. Because the spiritual vigor of the residence would dry up sooner or later, they would not put anything important inside, which was even more worthless. Deng Zhang said, that fellow cultivator used to be a sentient cultivator and had always desired to reach the upper realm. He collected many ancient records from his predecessors and even his peers. After that, he gave up on the past and entered the heartless path. I suspected that there were records left behind in his previous cave residences, so I went to look for it and really found some clues. Bai Wei said, "What is it?" Deng Zhang said, "High and distant, not in the human realm." Bai Wei's expression changed. Deng Zhang said, "Any path of Tao, when it reaches the extreme point of the source, will be cleared and return to the same place. I am walking on the heartless path, so I will cut off all the future and become empty. Then, I will be able to achieve the one and only Tao. Since it is the one and only, everything is sufficient, so why bother about the outside? I think this is the reason why the people of the current world have never seen someone from the upper realm." Bai Wei thought for a while and could not help but nod. What Deng Zhang said was that it was not that the people from the upper realm could not come back, but they were not willing to come back. Just like how they were in Bushu heaven, they were not willing to go anywhere else. It was also possible that the people from the upper realm had higher pursuits and their Tao heart had changed, so they did not look back. He also hoped that this was the case, but it was just deceiving oneself to hope that others would not find trouble with you. But now, because they were powerless to change anything, they could only think positively. After Zhang Yan took the jade scroll, it was different from when he took it from Taoist Wan Kei's hands just now. There was a huge pressure in his heart for no reason. He paused and his gaze deepened. This sign was not right. This was probably because when he first held the item, he only examined it briefly, so he did not feel all these. Now that he wanted to delve deeper and really touch upon the secrets within, just now, it was reflected. He could feel that if he continued to look at these things, there would be bad consequences. With his current cultivation base, he could be said to be the best in the world, and after repeated calculations, he had a rough guess. There was nothing wrong with the jade scroll itself, but after he looked at these, it might cause another change in the evolution process, and he would not get the truth of the past. This meant that Taoist Wan Kei's experience would not be peeped at by others. This was not his doing, but he himself probably did not know that there was such a thing. If it was forcefully done, the consequences would be unpredictable. Fortunately, this was not without a solution. Because this was originally the infusion of Taoist Wan Kei's memories, he could draw it out, and after some changes, he could then explain it in detail. With a thought, wisps of aura floated out of the jade slip, and then condensed into a painting in the air that looked like it was made of ink and brush. However, each painting was erratic, and the scene was constantly changing. Because this was a layer of separation, and not directly looking at the contents, and what was shown here was only a part of it, and not the whole, so there would not be any changes in karma. Of course, because what was shown at the moment was extremely unclear, if he wanted to go deeper, he would have to try to deduce it himself. But he did not need to understand everything, because everything that Taoist Wan Kei experienced was a failure, and there was no need to accept everything. The scene that was shown now could be said to be constantly changing, and it was difficult to sort out the clues, but some things would definitely not change, and he only needed to find these and grasp the general idea. As for the details, they were originally uncertain, and the more he believed, the easier it was to be trapped. He quickly found that this was not without its benefits, because this kind of deduction undoubtedly allowed him to get rid of those inherent restraints, and look down from a higher place, sorting out the most useful parts. As he continued to deduce, his understanding of this gradually deepened, and he gradually approached this realm. After a long time, he saw everything, and could not get any more useful clues. With a wave of his sleeve, he dispersed the painting of aura, and then retracted his gaze. At this time, he looked at the jade scroll in his hand, and suddenly found that something was wrong. When Taoist Wan Kei handed it to him, he was very clear about what it looked like, but now it seemed to be different from before. On the surface, it looked exactly the same as when Taoist 1K handed it to him, but there were many subtle differences. Especially when this thing was originally visualized by Taoist 1 Quebec. If such an object was not visualized at that time, then after thousands of years, it would have a sense of incompatibility with the surroundings. Perhaps ordinary people would not be able to feel it, but people of his level of cultivation would be able to understand it at a glance. But the jade scroll in front of him gave people a feeling of vicissitudes, as if it had experienced the accumulation of countless years. At the same time, it was like a newborn baby, just now entering the world, and it looked very contradictory. Zhang Yan changed his mind. Could it be that his deduction just now caused this thing to change? When a true young mighty person's aura covered the outside, it could be said that within their aura, everything would be under their influence. However, it was absolutely impossible for such a situation to happen to him. When he first obtained Bu Su Tian's spiritual energy, there were still some flaws in his control. Perhaps this would have happened. But now, he could control his spiritual energy as he wished. Whatever he wanted, it would change. There would not be any mistakes. Moreover, he clearly remembered that for the sake of not affecting the jade slip, he didn't affect it in the slightest when he took the thought from the jade slip, so how could such a situation occur? After thinking for a moment, a light flashed in his mind, and he thought of a possibility. Could this thing be the legendary world-knowing jade scroll? Or an incomplete part? This item had always appeared and disappeared without a trace. Perhaps it had never left Taoist 1K's body ever since he saw the jade scroll, but he did not know about it. But now, because he had handed over the karma, he took the opportunity to appear now. With this thought, the layer of strange feeling on the jade slip suddenly faded away, and it returned to its original appearance. Seeing this, Zhang Yan couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. Connecting the descriptions of this thing since ancient times, he couldn't help but have a guess. This thing was so mysterious, it was very likely to be the world-knowing jade scroll. However, this thing could only be seen when the person holding it didn't know what it was. Once the person realized what it was and realized what it was, it would disappear from the person's side or return to its normal appearance, as if it had never appeared in the first place. This might be the reason why this thing had never appeared in front of people. He thought about it. In fact, the change of this thing was somewhat similar to the transition to the upper realm. There should be some connection between the two. No wonder there was a record of the path to Chaos Heaven. Although Taoist 1K never found this thing again, from the current situation, it was very likely that this thing had always been on his body before someone accepted the karma. It was just that he didn't know it himself. And after this person entrusted his past to him, this thing was also handed over. His eyes flashed slightly. If this deduction was correct, then before someone accepted the karma, this thing should still be with him. He suddenly realized that this was an opportunity. If he could make this thing appear before him again, he might be able to peek into more secrets of the upper realm. But how should he call it out again? Thinking of this, he looked at the jade scroll in his hand and fell into deep thought. Chapter 1896. Zhang Yan first thought of going back to what he saw just now, trying to find this item in the shadow of the past. From when Taoist 1K first spoke to him, to just now, the moment the jade scroll appeared mysterious, he looked back and forth several times, but did not find anything strange. He did not expect to succeed in one try, and continued to look deeper. But no matter how he looked back and forth, he could not find any trace of this item, as if it did not exist in the past. He had expected this result. When Taoist 1K discovered that this scroll had disappeared, he should have tried this method, but in the end, he did not find anything. Since this method was not suitable, then he would change to another method. As he thought about it, he recalled the scene when Taoist 1K handed him the jade slip. Why did he have to turn the thing he gave him into a scroll, and not into a talisman or something else? Was it simply because this kind of thing was most used by cultivators? He thought that it was not just that, there might be another possibility, and that was that the world-knowing scroll still had a slight effect on it, so he subconsciously condensed the thing he gave him into this shape. If this speculation was true, then this item should have an effect on him, but the effect here was very small, and it was very likely that it had already integrated into his chi activity, so he could not feel it. But if he found this point, and then went back along this line, he might be able to find this item. With his previous experience, he understood that he shouldn't just focus on one place when dealing with this thing, but he should take care of everything. Thus, he closed his eyes and focused his mind. His divine intent instantly extended into the surroundings, past and future, and he tried to sense all the changes in this place. This train of thought was correct. Because no matter how fleeting this item was, since it once appeared in the present world and was seen by people who passed by, then it must have some kind of connection with the present world. No matter how small it was, it still existed. Right now, his cultivation was the highest in the world, and had reached the pinnacle of Tao below the upper realm. Other than involving matters of a higher level, there was almost nothing that could hide from his senses. So very soon, a faintly discernible abnormality appeared in his mind. He found that this was different from anything he had seen before. It was like a thread woven from mist, very fleeting and blurry. Although he could vaguely feel it, when he stretched out his hand, it seemed to slip through the gaps of his fingers, and he could not truly grasp it. That should be the trace of this bamboo slip in the present world. He repeatedly tried to sense it. He always felt that he could obtain it in the next moment, but it also felt like he would never be able to touch it. Fortunately, he was able to sense this, which meant that he was already on the right path. The worst thing to be afraid of was not having a clue. Now that he had a direction, he would definitely be able to think of a solution. However, just as he was thinking about this, he suddenly discovered that the strand of feeling was becoming weaker and lighter, as if it was about to leave his body. His gaze sharpened as he came to a realization. If there was no accident, the more this thing focused on it, the further it would be from its host. Moreover, this process was irreversible. Even if it didn't leave him in the end, it was very likely that it would completely disappear. He calculated for a while. Under normal circumstances, if he wanted to rely on that strand of feeling to find the original of this thing, even he would need at least half a day. This also had to take into account that this thing would continue to disappear as he focused on it, and the remaining time was actually not enough to find it. It was not that there was no way here. He could calm his mind, calm his thoughts, and only use his own Tao technique to find the auspicious location. After that, he would go out to search. If he could find it in one strike, then he would have achieved his goal. However, if he failed, then he would be sad again, and it was difficult to say whether it would cause other variables. Fortunately, apart from this, he had a better method. He reached into his sleeve, held the remnant of the jade, and sank his mind into it. This place could perfectly reproduce every single change on one's body, so there was also the reaction of the jade slip here. Because this reaction was also reflected, it would not interfere with the real thing, nor would it cause it to move away. In this way, as long as he repeatedly deduced here, he would be able to quickly grasp the key to capturing this thing. Because he didn't have to think too much about time inside the remnant of the jade, he could calmly do it. After his mind immersed in it for a long time, he gradually understood how to capture that strand of clue. Because he thought about the possible accidents that might occur, he stayed here for a while longer. Only when he had a solution did he leave. As soon as his mind came out, he immediately acted according to the method. In the blink of an eye, he caught hold of the joint. Then, he climbed up and stared at it firmly. After a while, he opened his eyes and held the jade slip in front of his eyes. He saw that the jade slip had returned to its original, ancient, and new contradictory appearance. He had successfully returned it to him. However, this didn't mean that this item would not disappear. The reason why it appeared before him was because he had temporarily frozen it. However, because his mind was focused on it, this item would gradually fade until it completely disappeared. This was something that couldn't be stopped. Therefore, from this moment on, he had to make full use of his time. His mind turned, and in an instant, many mysteries of the upper realm appeared in his mind. But very quickly, he discovered that some of the things he had seen had become blurry, as if he was in the midst of forgetting them. But logically speaking, not to mention a person of his cultivation, even an ordinary cultivator would absolutely not forget what they had seen in the past. This situation seemed to be a bit unusual. However, he was very calm about this because he could roughly guess the reason. This was because this thing involved many future changes. If it was derived, it would be endless. Some of the blurry parts were only because he hadn't met them yet. Once he had a connection with them, he would naturally be able to remember them. As for those that he hadn't met, it meant that they wouldn't happen, so he didn't have to worry too much about them. Right now, he could only try his best to look at the contents within. Not long after, he felt that the feeling had nearly disappeared. With a change of heart, he didn't let it completely disappear, and instead took the initiative to retract it. At this moment, he raised his head. His eyes were shining brightly, and there was a flickering light in them. After looking at the jade slip, he had a rough idea of how to climb to the upper realm. However, there were some differences between what Taoist Wan Ke told him and what he saw now. This wasn't a deliberate lie, but it might be because when Taoist Wan Ke realized that he was holding the world-knowing jade, this item immediately disappeared. Adding on to the fact that he had forgotten about it, what he saw shouldn't be the entire thing, but just a portion. Another reason was that after he went to the upper realm, there was a karma connection, which probably triggered some changes. From this, not only would there be changes in the future, but it was very likely that everyone who tried to climb to the upper realm would encounter different situations. However, he knew that this was a good thing. Although it looked very different on the surface, it was actually the same thing. There had to be similarities. Because of this, he once again entered the spirit wheel and carefully analyzed it. Only after everything was sorted out did he come out of his meditation. He thought about it and thought, now that everything is clear, I can try to climb to the upper realm. However, the mysteries of heaven haven't arrived yet, I'm afraid I still have to wait for a period of time. From the world-knowing bamboo slip, after one's cultivation reached perfection, it was not suitable to cross over to the upper realm at any time and place. Here, one also had to pay attention to the laws of fate. This was because the muddy heaven was also reflected in the Busu heaven. When one's senses were the strongest, that was when the laws of fate had arrived. In the past, Taoist Wan Ke didn't read much from the jade slip, so he didn't know about this. This was probably one of the reasons for his failure. For the next few days, Zhang Yan was calculating the timing of that day. In the end, he calculated that there might be opportunities to be found within half a year. Before he left, he could find a way to settle the matters around him. With a flick of his finger, a spiritual light flew into the lower realm. Not long after, Jingyu came to report, Master, Shangzhen Lu is here. Zhang Yan, call her in. Not long after, Lu Yenny came up to the hall and bowed, disciple greets Master. Zhang Yan nodded slightly and said, how's your cultivation recently? Lu Yenny replied, with Master's secret teaching, disciple feels that her progress is very fast. Zhang Yan said, Busu's spiritual opportunity is limitless, and he has countless treasures. To increase his mana, he only needs to cultivate step by step. However, his cultivation experience cannot be delayed. Most of the bottlenecks in cultivation lie in this. The higher the realm, the more important the cultivation experience is. You must remember this. Busu Heaven's cultivation was not lacking in external objects. Not to mention external calamities, the only obstacle in cultivation was the various obstacles in cultivation. However, this place didn't lack external objects, but it was only relatively speaking. It didn't mean that sitting in the door would bring you here. You also didn't need to search around. Busu Heaven was boundless and all kinds of treasures were widely distributed. There were also countless fierce monsters on the land. Even the cultivators of the Grotto Heaven had to be careful when traveling. Normal disciples couldn't go far. Even the great cultivators who had severed their mortal bodies had to refine treasures and elixirs by themselves sometimes. Therefore, this was not an easy task. Lu Yenny said seriously, disciple will follow Master's teachings. Zhang Yan said, I have been comprehending Tao recently, and I have caught a glimpse of the fate of the upper state. When the heavenly secret arrives, I will look for the upper state. After I leave, you will be in charge of the Zhaoyu sect. However, after I entered the human path, there will be quite a number of external Daos outside. In the heavens, there might be hidden secrets. To prevent future chaos, I have left a doppelganger here, and it can ensure the safety of the sect. If you encounter any difficulties, you can go and ask for advice. Lu Yenny bowed and said seriously, disciple will take good care of Zhaoyu sect and wait for master's return. Zhang Yan smiled and nodded, take out the waning moon sword pill. Lu Yenny responded. With a move of her mind, she raised the waning moon sword pill gently and brought it out. In an instant, there were soft and clear waves in the hall. Zhang Yan pointed with his finger and a ray of light entered the sword pill. He said, go back and refine it well. If you keep it right, you will gain something. When you are in danger, you can use it to kill the enemy. It will be effective. Chapter 1897. Lu Yenny took back the missing moon sword orb. She felt that not only did it contain a vast amount of magic power, but it also contained a magic formula. However, when she looked at it, it didn't seem real. She thought about it and was able to deduce a few sentences. However, as she went on, she felt that it was very difficult. She knew that her Tao was still lacking, and she needed to follow her master's advice and cultivate diligently. Only then would she be able to comprehend more. She bowed and said, thank you, master, for the technique. Zhang Yan said, just now, you have already grasped a bit of the trick. However, this technique was passed down by me, so it is not something that belongs to you. Therefore, it is difficult to verify it with your own Tao. You don't need to be in a hurry, you can take your time to comprehend it. He gave Lu Yenny some pointers on some of the key points before ordering this eldest disciple to step down. In fact, with a clone here, even if he wasn't here personally, it would be difficult for a disciple to ask for help. In fact, it was even more convenient, because the clone didn't need to cultivate, and only needed to maintain its own qi. At this moment, he had a thought, and after a while, he saw a wisp of water coming from outside the hall. It slowly gathered, and finally condensed into the shape of a half-snake and half-turtle. Zhang Yan said, fellow Taoist Black Tortoise, the door to the upper realm is right in front of us. I will go there in a few days. Fellow Taoist, why don't you wait here? If I can reach the upper realm, I will give you some good fortune. The Black Tortoise also sent a divine will over, saying that it would guard the Qinghuan Palace and wait for his return. Zhang Yan nodded. With the clone taking care of the upper realm and the Black Tortoise guarding the lower realm, there was no need to worry about the sect. However, as Hall Lord Duzhen of the Qinsang school, he had to inform the sect that he was leaving. Sect leader Qin was currently cultivating, so it was not convenient for him to meet him. The people in charge of the sect were Qi Yuntian, Meng Zhida, Sun Jian, and other elders. With a thought, a clone left the Qinghuan Palace and headed for the mountain and sea realm. Above the void sea of Qinsang school, Qi Yuntian had a rare moment of free time because of the recent events. At this moment, he felt something and knew that Zhang Yan had arrived. He pondered. Ever since Zhang Yan opened up Xianyuan Heaven, he no longer asked about the specific matters of the sect. Even if he wanted to mobilize the sect disciples, he only needed to issue a decree, such as when he attacked the Myriad K Starstream. But now that he had brought his doppelganger here, something must have happened. His expression instantly turned serious. With a wave of his hand, he dismissed the disciples on his left and right, leaving only his eldest disciple, Guan Yingyue, behind. Then, he looked up into the sky. After a while, a clear light descended and landed on the platform. In an instant, it turned into a young Taoist in a black robe. Qi Yuntian bowed and said, greetings, Hall Master Duzhen. Guan Yingyue, who was beside him, bowed. Zhang Yan raised his hand to return the greeting and said, Hall Master Qi, greetings. Qi Yuntian saw that his expression was normal and calmed down. Even if something happened, it would not endanger the sect. He stretched out his hand and said, Hall Master Duzhen, please take a seat and talk. Both sides came to the table and sat down. Above the void sea, there was a wave, and a formation spirit stepped on the water. It surged up with the waves and served spirit tea in the jade stove. Qi Yuntian and Zhang Yan exchanged a few words, then said, Hall Master Du Zhen, how come you have time to return to the sect today? Zhang Yan smiled and said, when I was sitting and observing the various realms, I occasionally heard an elder of the sect suggesting that the sect should be moved to the Kunshe continent. When Qi Yuntian heard him ask about this, he was a little surprised. Although this discussion did not involve the foundation, it was not a small matter. It could be considered as a small move, so he did not dare to take it lightly. He thought about his words and said, there were a few elders who suggested this. However, after the 9 continents entered the mountain sea, all the sects have advanced and retreated as one. Because this realm has been in operation for a long time, it has long been regarded as a place of foundation. Although there are many benefits in the Kunshe continent, there is still a need to rebuild the sect's foundation. There are many sects who oppose this, so until now, there is still no agreement. Zhang Yan nodded slightly and said, then what does Hall Master Qi think? Qi Yuntian seemed to have thought about it and said, although the Kunshe continent has unlimited spiritual opportunity and is very suitable for cultivation, it is not suitable for those who have just entered the Tao. No matter what the other sects say, the Qinsang school will at most send some Jinren to stay there. If the junior disciples make contributions, then they can follow the elders to this place. However, they cannot stay for long and must return within a few years. Zhang Yan smiled and said, this is a good idea. However, there are still many unsolved secrets in Busu Tian. When it is activated, it may cause changes in the world, so we must be prepared. He took out a talisman and gently pushed it to the front of Qi Yuntian. If Busu Tian changes in the future, then you can put this in the floating heavenly palace. It should be safe. Qi Yuntian took the talisman and felt as if he was holding a world in his hand. He knew that it must contain the power to change the world, so he kept it carefully. At this moment, he had vaguely guessed something. He looked up at Zhang Yan and asked, Hall Master Du Zhen, are you going to cultivate in isolation again? Zhang Yan smiled and said, not to cultivate, but to have a glimpse of the upper state. Qi Yuntian was moved. It was already difficult for a cultivator to cultivate to the true yang state, not to mention the legendary door to the upper state. He did not expect Zhang Yan to reach this step. However, this was a good thing for the Qinsang school. He stood up and made a formal bow. I wish Hall Master Du Zhen good luck. Zhang Yan smiled and said, the upper state is mysterious. I may leave the world. This time, I will leave a Dharmakaya here. If there is anything in the sect, you can go to the Xianyuan sky to look for me. When he finished, he stood up and made a bow. He shook his sleeve, and a clear light rose from the table and disappeared. Qi Yuntian stood there for a long time and said to Guan Yingyue, what I said today, do not tell anyone except the elders. Guan Yingyue bowed and said, disciple understands. When Zhang Yan's doppelganger went to the mountain and sea realm, his spirit also went into an unknown place. After waiting for a while, Dan Yi, Fu Qingming, and Michihito Ichido all arrived. After everyone greeted each other, Dan Yi said, fellow Taoist Zhang, is it related to the upper state that you invited us here? Zhang Yan said, yes, I have been practicing Taoist techniques recently. According to my calculations, there might be a good opportunity in the near future, so I wanted to inform all of you first. Dan Yi said with emotion, fellow Taoist, you are finally going to take this step. Fu Qingming said solemnly, fellow Taoist, you must be careful. According to the records, there had been many great powers who had tried to break through this barrier since the 3 eras, yet no one had ever succeeded. Even though Zhang Yan's magic power and cultivation were unparalleled in the world, and perhaps there were few who could compare to him throughout the ages, it was still not certain that he would succeed. Zhang Yan nodded and said, fellow Taoist is right. Before he ascended to the true yang state, he had Fu Qingming to guide him. But this time was different. So far, no one in the upper state had appeared in front of him. In the past, those who had tried had all failed. Therefore, even though he had seen the world knowing slip, he was not sure that he would succeed. He needed to be extra careful. Michihito Ichido was very carefree and said, if it was someone else, it might be hopeless. But if it was fellow Taoist Zhang, I think it would be possible. Zhang Yan smiled and said, when I ascend to the upper state, I might implicate the current world and cause some changes in the qi dynamic, giving rise to some strange signs. However, regardless of success or failure, it will retreat, so don't worry. Fu Qingming then said, fellow Taoist, what do you think the upper state looks like? After he became a Taoist god, he could no longer go up, but he still had some regrets in his heart. That was why he asked this question. Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, this technique is hard to describe. I can only say one sentence, extremely high and distant, look at the sky and not the people. Fu Qingming thought for a while and finally let out a long sigh. After Zhang Yan explained everything to them, he retreated from the spirit. But at this moment, he suddenly thought of the location of the 9 continents. Ever since the various sects ascended, he had never returned to that place. That place should have long been devoid of spiritual opportunities. But after passing down a technique that he created, he wondered what that place looked like now. Thinking of this, he looked at the 9 continents. But what surprised him was that when he looked at it previously, it was abnormally clear. But because he felt that the opportunity had not arrived, it was inconvenient for him to go there, so he continued to pay attention. But now that he looked, he saw that it was enveloped in a layer of fog, and it was hard to distinguish it clearly, as if it was not in this world. Seeing this situation, he could not help but think. From the very beginning, the 9 continents was the place where the patriarchs of various sects stayed, especially the Grand Underworld Patriarch, whose realm was so high that it was still difficult to estimate. And the cultivators that ascended from the 9 continents were not only from the Qinsang school, but also from Shaoqing, Yuxiao, and even other sections. But now, not a single one of them could be seen. With his current strength, he was able to observe all the heavens in the world a long time ago, yet he was unable to find the whereabouts of these people. This was probably because the places they had gone to were not within the scope of his usual understanding, so they might very well be within the chaotic heaven. But no matter what, as long as he could go to the upper realm, he would be able to find the answer. In the following days, he waited there quietly, silently sensing the changes of the world. All the changes in the world were reflected in the spirit, and not a single bit would be missed. Half a year passed quickly. On this day, the feeling of the muddy heavens suddenly magnified and appeared in his heart. It was originally blurry, and it was between existence and non-existence. But now, it was like the moon hidden in the fog, and the haze dispersed, suddenly revealing itself to the world. His eyes flashed. Although he had waited for this moment for a long time, he was still not in a hurry to move, and instead carefully calculated there. This involved his life and Tao path. If he failed, the best outcome would only be the outcome of Taoist Wan Ke, so he had to be extremely careful. So if this opportunity was not suitable, he would rather miss it and spend more time waiting for the next one than take the risk easily. He stretched out his spirit and observed the past and future. The strange thing was that he could not find a more suitable opportunity than the one in front of him, and he seemed to have understood something. He smiled slightly, and in an instant, he released all his mana.